Everyone, it is 12 noon on Monday, October 10th, 2022. This is the Superintendent's Workshop. We are meeting in the Joanne Idlett Junior Teacher Education Center. We'll begin this workshop at this time. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have a very full agenda. Talking about being full, it's been a very full time here in the School District of Indian River County. This past Saturday, we had our Choice Extravaganza Fair. Over 300 students performed. Each of our schools were there to highlight the great things that they're doing in their school, community organizations. I think it was over 35 different community organizations. It was just a great day. It really spoke in two different ways. A sense of community, and B, the quality of the work that our folks are doing in our schools. So very proud of what we saw Saturday evening. We had the opportunity to pass out trophies, or I had the opportunity to pass out trophies at the Crown Jewel event, which is an annual event hosted by Vero Beach Senior High School band. And we had about 14 different bands from across our county or across the state come in and participate. Sebastian River High School was one of those bands. My back hurts from carrying every single trophy over to Sebastian River High School. Clean sweep in terms of all of the accolades and awards that they received. So we're happy to see the work that's being done. Now, that was a quick little update of the great things happening in the School District of Indian River County. I'll give it over to Mr. Fagan for his items to present.
Dr. Moore, through the chair, to the board members, 3 items today for me. One is the renewal of the AON coalition with Express Scripts. Recall, this is one item of which we are part of a coalition of many private sector organizations. Not many public sectors are participating in this. It's our second renewal. It's for a 3-year renewal. The program is about $20 million a year. Big drive about the program is the amount of rebates we get. Currently, we're getting about $6.4 million in rebates. That rebate under the new contract would increase to $9 million. So that's an additional $2.6 million of savings for the plan, as well as employees when they pay their co-pays and get their prescriptions. Second core item is a purchase of 120 administrative laptops. They're about $1,000 a piece, so it's $120,000. This is part of an ongoing refresh plan in the technology department. In 21-22, we refreshed 1,200 teacher laptops. So this begins the process of replacing any of those that might have damaged, plus also admin. In 23-24, we'll have another 120 units to refresh. And then in 24-25, going out to 29-30, we'll spend approximately $400,000 to continue to refresh units as they get older and become obsolete. Last item, of course, is disposal of surplus property, approximately 44 items. Net present value is about $3,100. Most items have become obsolete, some dated back to 1998. Any questions?
Okay. Board members, any questions?
Just a comment. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate the work that you've done over the years in a variety of forms of contracting, to piggyback on other contracts, to how you connect with other resources to save the district money when we have to replenish and add technology. So just want to publicly say thank you for that.
Thank you, and that also goes out to the team. They drive most of the work.
And the team, I know you, and I want to acknowledge, you always shout out to your team, and you know, the mark of a good leader is the person who shouts out to his team and doesn't take all the credit himself. So
Absolutely
thank you
not.
for that as well.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
So
I
I just want
have a
to
question.
acknowledge my team too. Go ahead.
All right. Do you want to take that time now?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Mr. Fagan, on the laptops, you said for administrators and teachers, approximately how many teachers are we refilling for laptops?
Through the chair, approximately 50%. It depends on the demand. We may have some older admins. Most of your teachers should have already been replaced. Now, we may have run into a couple of items where a particular room may not have wanted a laptop, and they may have kept the desktop for one reason whatsoever. Well, we're trying to push that initiative. No, you can't have that desktop anymore. It must be a laptop.
Okay, so my next question is, and you know I'm going there, is when I was in a classroom and observed, teachers use that reward system on PBS, and a lot of the teachers have to stop what they're doing, go to their desk to do it while they're trying to reward kids and still teach. So will this new system be able to talk to their whatever in the system so they can go around the classroom, they don't have to go back to their...
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
So they can carry it with them and do whatever?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And is it high-tech enough that they can write on there, it'll be shown on their screen?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any other questions? Doc?
Just a comment to Mr. Fagan. Thank you for the savings that we have regarding our Express Scripts and being a part of the coalition for that. A lot of people, I know it makes a difference in their lives, so thank you.
All right, so our next bulk of items
That's me again.
is also Mr. Fagan.
All right. Next item is the renewal of the contracts for the, not the contracts, the annual reports from the charter schools. All the charter schools turned in their annual audits on time. They were reviewed, and I also sent an email on the 4th of where you've got a copy of all the audited financials and a quick summary. Basically, 4 of your 5 had an increase in your net financial position. 3 of the 5 increased general funds in excess of their expenditures, and all the schools have a strong ending fund balance. The ending fund balance as a percentage of revenue for the charter schools range somewhere between 11% and 98%.
Board members, anybody have a question on that? No?
I do, Ms.
Oh, I'm sorry, Doc.
This is not dealing with finance right now, but Dr. Moore, when will we be looking at compliance with charter schools, especially with the DSAC order? Is that another meeting or?
Through the chair, I'd be happy to provide an update to the board. We are in the middle of that process right now, so looking at each individual charter, which is the contract we have with charter schools. In addition to that, the federal court requirements associated with the desegregation order and providing opportunities for those schools to respond what they're doing in those specific areas. Right now, we're looking at providing ESE support to schools, ensuring that that appropriate support is being provided. So as the holder of the charter, we evaluate the charter itself and then provide support and feedback to those entities to provide any recommendations or changes or anything that we find. We're in the middle of that process right now. We'll be more than happy to provide that support, that information to the board. In terms of the DSEG order, we've already had that feedback provided to the board, and that's information I can provide. We'll provide it to the charter school companies.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, when I looked at the financial reports, and a lot of them had the same accountants, and there's this one paragraph, if you could just explain to me, in the letter from the CPAs that management has elected to omit substantially all of the disclosures, government-wide financial statements, in management's discussion and analysis required by accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. If the omitted information were included in the financial statements, they might influence the user's conclusion about the school's financial position and results of operation. Accordingly, these financial statements are not designed for those who are not informed about such matters. Of course, I read that and then talked with a couple of my colleagues that used to be chief financial officers. What does that say to the public? Because when I look at fund balance, I'll look at one school, like 250,000 in one school, up to 4 million for fund balance. But what does that say to the public?
Through the chair, basically, it does not give the public the details of exactly how those expenditures were spent and be able to do a comparison to the prior year. If you don't have those details, then you're basically looking at high-level numbers, and you can't do that kind of analysis. You ended good, but you just can't tell the story on how you got there. If you don't do a good, strong MD&A, you can't discuss what happened. You can't explain to the public in layman's terms, I started here and I ended here and why and what happened. You eliminate some of that deeper dive into the explanation as to how did you get to where you are.
Okay. And then basically, we are required to have about 80% of the FEFP on direct instruction. When you look at the charter schools, are they meeting that guideline, or how is that working?
So the chair of Florida statute does not require
I
them to
know.
meet that requirement.
Do you know how many come close to it? I know they're not required to do it.
I'd have to do some analysis and come back to you on that.
Okay. And these are questions I'm receiving from charter school parents, so that's why I wanted to bring it up. And also, are we checking teacher certification or degrees for all of our charter schools? Now, I know teachers have to be certified, administrators do not, and I'm not talking about out of field, I'm talking about degrees. Are we checking on that?
So the chair, I can't speak 100% for HR on an ongoing basis, but currently right now we're in an FTA audit. Part of that is teacher certification, and the AG auditor will audit charter schools and ask those same questions.
Okay. All right, and I'll follow up with Dr. Moore on that. And Dr. Moore, you said as far as the ESE services, we're giving support there for our
Through
schools?
the chair, looking at what's required, both per the state as well as federal requirements, and then providing any support in which opportunities to grow. So this is a arm of support, not a arm of accountability.
Okay. Are most of our contracts, I saw a couple of the contracts were for 15 years, is that correct, for our charter schools?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's all for now, thank you.
Mr. Rosario?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. When you said the ESC, that we are providing support services for ESC needs in the charter schools, what do you mean by that? Because it's my understanding that charter schools contract out to school psychologists, local school psychologists, or people in that field who provide those kinds of services that they don't always come here. So if a charter school chooses to go elsewhere or recommends a parent for servicing or for evaluation in a different location through a different entity, how does that affect what you're saying that we provide? So can you give a little clarity as to our services being optional or mandatory?
So through the chair, it is looking at the charter itself in terms of what would be required, not necessarily by the school board, but you are the individuals who hold the charter. So in looking at what is required by federal law in terms of services and support provided to ESE students, there's always opportunities to go in and explore, ask for where assistance needs to be provided. We do have an entire office and system that provides that level of support. So it's going in and saying, in looking at the charter, there may be opportunities to improve here. It really is to engage in the dialogue and have a conversation in terms of offering of support, guidance, in order to ensure that all systems, whether it's a charter or public system, are in compliance with state and federal requirements as it relates to one of our most fragile students.
But how does that work applicably on a daily basis? If they request the services, they would contact us. We don't have anything to do with monitoring their day-to-day operations.
Through the chair, as a charter, this is the opportunity to go and sit and to look at what is in fact happening. So yes, we are going through looking at the requirements, which is part of our obligation because we hold the charter, and identifying opportunities to provide support if there need be.
If there need be.
If there need be. Now, I'll be very honest with you, the relationship we have with our charter schools, each of them is very positive, and the exchange of information and the offering of support is a standing invitation. So this is just an annual opportunity that I've created through staff to say, on an annual basis, let's look at, as these, not only these financial audits go, but everything else under the charter, which is a contract that the charter company has with this school district through the school board to ensure that we are in full compliance. We have an obligation to our community in order to ensure that the established contract between the school district and the charter is being upheld. That's the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I can tell you that recently there was a parent who had some concerns, needed some ESC, a child who needed an evaluation, and it just wasn't happening at the particular school. And so upon reaching out to the district, she got a response right away. She was very, very satisfied with the response, and actually said, wow, that was pretty easy. So I think that's fantastic, but it was really up to someone to reach out to the district and say, hey, can you offer this, or I need this support. And so otherwise, there is no way that we would be able to know that there is a need unless someone reaches out.
Absolutely.
The other question with regard to human resources and hiring, this district, I know the answer, I'm just putting out there, does this district hire charter school teachers?
Through the chair, we do not hire their employees.
Do we monitor charter school teacher certifications?
Through the chair, we do not.
We do not. Do we have any control or say over what a charter school, how a charter school puts teachers in their classroom in terms of whether they're in field or out of field?
We do not.
Do we have anything to do with their scheduling?
Through the chair, we do not.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we understand that that's not our role. We are overseers of the charter, but there are certain limitations in terms of human resources that it's not our responsibility.
Absolutely. And in that charter is is the agreement that that charter company will uphold all of those questions in which you just asked me.
Correct.
And if it has come to our attention that they are not, I am obligated on behalf of this board to provide the necessary support in order to ensure they do in fact align to those questions in which you just asked.
Correct. So which I totally understand, totally get. I knew all the answers to those questions. Just want to make it clear, the relationship, because we don't have anything to do with their daily operations.
You're not.
They run independent, even though we are, just like you mentioned, we are ultimately responsible for the charter itself. I know that could be a whole other presentation in and of itself, but we have a great, as you said, a great working relationship with our charters, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Right, Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, a quick follow-up on both of those things. The first one, to Dr. Jones's point, and which also considers Mrs. Rosario's point, there are certain things in the charters that we have no control over, but we are responsible for, school safety being the primary example. They don't have to follow our specific guidelines, yet we are responsible if something happens. In the financial reporting, as Dr. Jones alluded to, while that caveat suggests, from what I heard you say, you said, we are attesting to the fact that that our finances are fine, we're in good shape, et cetera. But they haven't gone through the documentation of that. If there were to be a financial failure of a charter, are we responsible for that? Or what's our relationship with them financially and our obligation? Similar to, or I'm using school safety as an example, and following Mrs. Rosario's questions, there are many things where we are responsible overall for the charter, but not their day-to-day operations, not how they hire, not how they fire, not their certifications, not their school safety plans. And what about their finances? How does that work?
Through the board, through the chair, we're not responsible should they file bankruptcy. If they file bankruptcy, they don't comply with the contract, then we go through the process in which to assist them in shutting them down. But we're not responsible. If their debtors come knock on our door and say they bought $100,000 worth of equipment, we're not responsible for that.
And the other piece of that is the students then, and this is not, this, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't happened in this county and isn't likely to happen in this county, but has happened in other counties. The primary concern, of course, is also the students who are then left without the school they thought they were going to. Do we have, obviously we would absorb those students, obviously we will take care of those students and those families. But the primary concern, among the primary concerns, it's not the only one, is not only the financial responsibility, but also the educational responsibility. Is there any way that we actually track that that's what's being said in these reports is accurate? Or do we only do that if we anticipate something egregious or erroneous, but otherwise we take their word for it that what they are reporting is true, factual, and accurate?
Through the chair. Quarterly, the board, each of the charter schools has to give us a monthly report, a quarterly financial report. That report will give us an indication as where they are financially, just like ours do. If things begin to go awry, we will notice that then. Generally, in an educational facility, things don't go south in 30 days. It will take some time before something would happen. Either all their FTE would go away, well, where did they go? They're more than likely going to come back to us, which would mean then they would have to start cutting expenditures. If they get to the point to where they're not performing academically, well, that's will now come under another side of the house to say, okay, now we got to look at the instructional programs that they're providing and are they meeting what the needs of the students. So anything happening quickly is probably very remote. It would take some time in which to actually begin to see something, unless there was fraud involved or some kind of embezzlement, which could take immediate impact.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Jones.
When I did receive these calls from charter school parents, and then I contacted Adam Emerson at the DOE, and he said the most important thing is looking at the contract that we have, and that's renewed every 15 years, I think, for the most part. I think that's too long, but that we'd have to talk about at the board. But you're right, to see that they are upholding what you just said, Mr. Fagan and Dr. Moore, on all of the areas, and that's our job as a sponsor to make sure that they are doing that. So that's the information you gave me, and that's why I'm looking at contracts. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. There is one particular school that had a pretty negative impact this year, but you say they're still financially okay?
Through the chair, are you referring to Indian River Charter High School, where they extended their lease and $15 million?
No, we talked about that, I know that.
Okay.
No, I think it's St. Peter's. Isn't that the one that had the negative? No, you were right. It was the charter high school. Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay,
They issued debt, and that's why you see a big
Okay.
negative, but it was covered with financing.
you're right. You also mentioned in the audit that they are checking charter schools. Are they just doing spot checks, or are they checking all the charter schools?
Through the chair, they identified it very similar, so it's a random sampling, a select number of schools for us, and a select number of schools for charter schools as well, but not all of them, no.
And is it just a financial audit, or is it
This
A total audit.
specific one is in the area of FTE,
FTE? Okay,
as well as other areas as well.
Teacher certification as well.
okay. Any other board, Mr. Barefoot?
Nothing, thanks.
Okay.
All right, thank you, board members, thank you, Mr. Fagan. We'll now move on to Ms. Becerra. She has a number of items, one of which will be school improvement, which is the work of this board and what we do on a daily basis. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. Through the chair, good afternoon, board members. As shared during our individual board briefings, I have 4 items that I'll be bringing before you. The first of the items is the Embry-Riddle Dual Enrollment Agreement. This is an agreement that we have with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. It's a standard agreement similar to years past, and this particular agreement runs through June of 2025. There may be a need at the end of this year where amendments are made, and if that's the case, we will bring an amendment forward annually, just like we did this past summer. The next item is Indian River State College Career Pathways, the articulation agreement between SDIRC and Indian River State College. That also, like Embry-Riddle, is a standard agreement that we engage in with IRSC. My next item is the School Advisory Council composition reports. This item encompasses the membership of School Advisory Council, also known as SAC, for individual schools. The composition report shows by school a breakdown of membership type that includes category, ethnicity, district employees, gender, and demographics. These reports align with Florida statute and school board policy and are brought before the board annually. And then my next and finally last item will be the school improvement planning process. So we have let me see, I have the clicker in front of me here. This is the one I'm actually the most excited to bring forward, not that the other stuff isn't exciting as well, but this is the work that my team and I get to do every day with the schools. Typically in the past, for all of the folks who've been in this education game for a while, a school improvement plan was written at the beginning of the year and sometimes put in a binder and put on the shelf until the end of the year. A couple years ago, Dr. Moore had us really reinvent the school improvement planning process for Indian River County, where it is living, breathing, ongoing. We engage in frequent feedback loops, and it's really almost like 3 or 4 mini school improvement planning cycles throughout the year. So this is the work that drives the work that my team gets to do every day and that our school leaders lead with their staff every day. There we go. So the work is really made up of 4 key phases. Prior to these 4 phases, though, I'll just back up. At the beginning of the summer, we engage our school leadership teams in an event called Pre-Ignite, and I know all of you had, some work that you were able to join us for during Pre-Ignite. During Pre-Ignite, they engage in a reflection process. That's really the formal process of reflecting on the year behind them, so that the decisions they make moving forward are, really made after a reflection process has occurred. So then we go into this phase 1, where they are analyzing data, they're reflecting on the year before, and they're identifying areas to grow. Phase 2 is when they refine that work. They're sharing phase 1 and phase 2 with their stakeholders at the beginning of the school year, so that they get feedback from all stakeholders. That includes their SAC committees. In the previous work, this plan would, like I said, be uploaded to the state and then not really ever looked at again. So then we move into phase 3, which is that mid-year implementation. That'll happen right around the semester break. In January, we do a pretty deep dive into what the first semester looked like, use that to analyze the work going into the second semester. And the really important part of phase 3, actually really phase 2 and phase 3, is we don't want to wait till the end of the year. We don't want to wait till we get to phase 4 where we reflect to make adjustments if adjustments are needed. If we identify early on that something needs to change, we want to change it where we still have opportunity to support students and teachers and achieve success. And so that really is the feedback loop that occurs throughout the year. Now, the next part of this is a visual representation of the timeline. What I just described really is that preview part at the top of the timeline is what happens in early June, called what we call pre-ignite. We move into then that phase 1 where school leadership teams and their stakeholders back at their school really dive into that data analysis. They collectively create implementation steps or action steps. They develop their parent and family engagement plans through Title I. Our school leaders engage in a peer review process where it's a little different than previously, where they are paired up and they actually review each other's school improvement planning process. And they do this not just to gain some ideas for themselves, because if there is a struggle in one school, there might be that same struggle in another school, and it's interesting to see how each other solves that problem. But it's also to it's to create some systems across the district itself, but it's also for them to create this collegiality where they're supporting each other. We are, as a system, and we will be stronger when we are doing this work together. So they engage in that peer review process, and then they go back and make adjustments and edits to their SIP. This next part of phase 1, the impact review walks, this is currently the part of the phase that we're in right now, where we're actually out there in the schools doing observations. Really, it's a observational check of the system and the system's health. And so from the data that we review and the observational data that we review, schools will then lead into phase 2, which is where they'll modify their SIP for phase 2. So you'll see that we are right in that, we are getting ready to implement phase 2. Then just as a wrap up, they repeat the same cycle for phase 2, they go through the same process for phase 3, and then they lead into the end of the year reflection that we talked about. So it's really a continuous improvement cycle. The key focus areas that our school leaders are working on right now are around academics, culture and climate, and family and community engagement. Everything that they're writing action steps for and implementation steps for are around these key focus areas. And this is really a visual of the intricacies of what that work looks like. They go through a data findings and rationale of the selection of data. They go through that process collectively. They identify high yield strategies. They then, out of the high yield strategy, create implementation steps to support that high yield strategy. They identify a point of contact, expected evidence, and then a plan for monitoring that work. And it, again, repeats for each of those 3 key areas. This is, again, just another representation of the fact that this is work that's ongoing. It's embedded in everything that we do. This is where we would come back in the mid-year and redo the same cycle for second semester. And then what we will be bringing to the board October 24th are the actual school improvement plans. What I've just highlighted for you is the process that they're going through. You'll see the actual school improvement plans prior to October 24th, but it's work that our principals are deeply embedded in. It's the work that they are doing daily. It's the work that we are doing daily in support of them. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions on their behalf. If there's a question that I can't answer on their behalf, I will certainly point you in the right direction or point them in your direction.
Okay, board members, anyone have a question on SAC plans? Ms. Rosario?
I do. Not really a question, just thought that we would have the conversation about vision and mission as we talked about in our individual meetings. So some of these, I'm actually pulling up the template, which I just lost. It's one of your backup items. So the template there includes goal area, and then there's data finding and rationale, and as they fill in the high yield strategy and so on and so forth. The goal there, what I didn't ask individually was, is that goal supposed to be the overall goal, vision, and mission of the school? Or is there a goal, what is that goal? What is the expectation of adding something in for the goal? Is that like reaching an academic goal? What is that goal
Yes,
supposed to
so,
be?
well, it would be really a goal in those three focus areas, a goal around academics, a goal around culture and climate, and a goal around parent and family family and
Gotcha.
community engagement.
Okay, gotcha. So I think that was part of the conversation. I apologize, because
Okay.
that just came to me right now, but part of our individual conversations for board members to know was the discussion around vision and mission. I remember years ago, like admin 101 class, you take an entire class for an entire year, understanding how important vision and mission is. And if you do not have a vision, the people shall perish, right? If you don't share that vision, get buy-in from that vision, get all of the constituents in your school building together to develop the vision of your school, how are you going to create the mission to actually achieve it? So of course we know vision is what you see, and the mission is how do you get there. Can you talk a little bit about where we are on vision and mission with the schools, especially with regard to their themes? Because if we are now, in this place, this good place of sharing our school choices and what the themes are what the theme programs are offered at each of these schools, how do vision and mission kind of tie in all of these components so that they could be articulated in a school improvement plan?
Great. And, as we discussed in our individual briefings, vision and mission is not just I think this and I feel this, so I'm going to attach it in print to my plan. It is a very complex process that is ongoing and should involve all stakeholders. This new school improvement plan is really in its infancy. It's one that we began using last year. And so there is some getting used to the plan and rethinking the way we set goals and identify the strategies to attain those goals. So the actual heavy lift of recreating visions and missions has not occurred. That is something I can see us looking forward to, but it's not something that we would just want them going in isolation and doing that work. That is really a big meaty piece of work that would be something that we would want to spend some time on.
I hope so. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to hearing how that would tie in. The interesting thing here, and of course you all will do that in your professional development and moving forward in your plan, however it unfolds. But the interesting thing here is tying in also the district strategic plan so that schools aren't doing something completely different than what the goals of the district are.
Right.
But at the same time, as our academic goals in our strategic plan indicate, we have kindergarten, really some key ones, right? Kindergarten readiness, we have ELA, math, now we've added science and social studies, which are really great. So those are the core. So how are the schools actually addressing those areas within their either their goals or their vision and the mission? I guess it would be in their goals. And then how does that tie in there? What's the delicate dance is that every school is going to look different because every school's data is different. Every school has a different set of students, different, test scores, different benchmarks. Now we have the new benchmark that's out. Where does the new benchmark fall in place within the school improvement plan? So I guess all of these kind of play a delicate role in, I guess, the developing of your principals and your APs, your instructional leaders in your school buildings, in our school buildings, to make sure that, all of these kind of pieces come together like a nice puzzle, right? All these puzzle pieces come together nicely. I see Dr. Moore is reaching for the microphone, so go ahead, sir.
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of each school's environment is significantly different. Do we have one set of standards? Yes, the entire state has one set of standards. But the barriers or the obstacles are unique to each individual school, and ultimately drilling down to each department and then drilling down to each specific teacher themselves. The data that we have created to help schools think. A school improvement process really is to improve the school site's organizational intelligence. How quick can we observe an instructional reality and then problem solve to identify where do we shift, where do we change instruction in order to support the 22, 25, whatever the number of students is in that specific classroom. It is about, rather than going beginning of the school year, you take your baseline assessment. In the old days, then you would, at the mid-year, monitor progress and then shift and make a change. That feedback loop that Kelly's talking about, our goal is to have those feedback loops as small as possible. Weekly, implement a strategy, implement a lesson, evaluate the impact on that lesson, problem solve on shifts or modifications to that strategy to ensure that it's meeting the needs of all kids. So what we're doing with this school improvement process is to be very specific to each individual school and then empower the schools to have those conversations each and every single day. And not, this is, yes, we want to improve academic performance within each of the EOC areas, reading proficiency, math proficiency, that's a given. How schools do it will be unique to their specific needs. Now, we have identified these high-yield strategies. These strategies are research-based strategies that, when implemented correctly, will in fact work. Now, how you implement them is unique to your specific school. So problem solving around doing what we know works, teaching the standards in which students will be assessed, and then allowing them through process to own a process that actually accelerates their understanding of how to shift or modify, actually will in fact improve the overall outcome for all students. And this is, Ms. Becerra said, this is a growing area of work, but what you're seeing is drastic improvement and shift across all schools. If you look at secondary schools in terms of where it was 2 years ago, just before the pandemic, where every single student in the classroom was sitting in a seat by themselves in a row, and every single student in that classroom was getting the exact same lesson, versus them being grouped in its differentiated instruction based on the needs of kids. That is what is expected to be individualized and to meet the needs of kids, seeing drastic improvements in terms of the alignment of instruction. Alignment to what? To the standards. That this is where students are going to be assessed versus a standard that was 2 or 3 years below the student. Man, what a disservice to the student not to give them the opportunity to be exposed to the actual standard. You will see increases in rigor. One of the biggest problems that we have as a system is high student achievement regression. A level 5 remaining a level 5, a level 4 remaining a level 4. One of the biggest complaints that I still hear is from parents who are stopping me saying, hey, my son was at UF and struggled. I don't feel as if they were prepared when they went off. We need to ensure that we're growing all academic levels of kids. And if we're teaching one lesson to 22 or 25 kids, we're missing the opportunity to differentiate to meet their specific needs, not just to pull students up to the standard, but to pull every student up regardless of where they sit. And that's the level of thinking that this process continues to support, to empower teachers to understand the impact that they're having, as well as empower them to make the shifts or changes they need to make to ensure all students are being successful. This is fun work.
So the academics, I have 2 other questions. The academics area here, another thought that occurred to me, the primary gist of the information that we'll see within the academics should be academic focused, right?
Correct.
So like lesson plans, curriculum, anything creative, anything theme related, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Where does and this is part of the same question, where do the new benchmarks versus the FSA come into play? So if we're looking at this template, academic significant data finding, would we see the new benchmark information there?
So you would see that information there. When we get to the mid-year new benchmark, the second benchmark for this year, that'll give us quite a bit of information because then we'll have
Right.
the ability to see what growth looks like. Because it's a new system, it's all relative and we don't have anything really to compare it to right now. So yes, that's an easy spot to identify the new benchmark data should start to feed that information, but not in isolation. Anything data-wise, we want to triangulate. We want to look at that globally
Right.
across the system, which is why you also see impact review walks, because we want to match what we're seeing data-wise on paper with what are we actually seeing in the classroom.
Right, so another thought that just occurred to me might be considering adding, or maybe in the future, 3 columns, because there's only 3 benchmarks, on the SIP that says this is where we are now, the mid-year, and then at the end. So as a school, they'd be able, and as a district, we would be able to see that growth that way.
Through the chair, and I think I was having that conversation, one of my board briefings today. We will be there next school year.
Right.
The state literally, and give the state some credit, they are in the process of creating a new system. So as we have one benchmark, all we literally have is a score.
Yeah.
We will be able to do a historical analysis as we move into next year to compare what is the rate of growth based on this new standard. So this is what they would call a baseline year. Scores for how we did this year, they're not going to come into like this time next year. We're still not going to have state comparison data because they're going to be doing all of their research and norming those specific data, creating cut scores. So there's a great deal of work to be done. But the fact that we're going to have that set of data across the entire state, from district to district, is really going to drive and push all districts forward. Very typical to what we do now, school to school. We'll be able to do district to district, which is exciting.
Yeah, I hope that the state, I mean, I'm not involved in any of those conversations, but I know when you're in your little circles or your superintendent workshops, when you get the word out to the state, because having scores doesn't really do anything. It doesn't teach anything. It doesn't help the teacher differentiate their instruction. Having a score doesn't say anything other than this is the score that the student received. It's that subset of information that really helps, right? It's that overall algebraic expressions, how did the student do on computation, how did the student do on all of these individual bullet points, I suppose, within that overall score, and that's what really drives the instruction. And I don't know if they're going to get there, but I hope they do. My guess is that they will, because what they're giving right now as they implement their this new process doesn't seem to be helpful at this very moment.
Correct.
But anyway, my last question is about the PD, professional development, and our PD days. Our PD days lessened from what they were previously in previous years. We don't have as many PD days, professional development days. So that's the other component of the school improvement plan that, you know, if our goal is to provide high-quality professional development and really help teachers improve in their craft and whatever their subject area is, how do we do that and still have time to provide what the state mandates and then everything else that we have on the to-do list of checkoff?
Through the chair, that's a very straightforward answer. We just stop doing what doesn't work, which is isolated, leave your school and get some professional development that isn't timely, it isn't aligned to what I'm specifically doing. We have more planning time than most likely any other district. And we use that time to really allow for professional development to take place by pairing teachers who teach the same core area and work together to identify these are the opportunities to improve or shift. So rather than saying, go and get a strategy on one specific area where you leave your school, replacing that time with frequent development and planning around what is going to be taught next week versus something I may or may not be applicable to me, really creates an environment in which teachers no longer have to feel as if they work in isolation, where they're given the keys and they go in the classroom and you don't see another adult until, you know, the end of the year or once a month during a faculty meeting. So making development at the need of those who receive the development. The author of our developments should in fact be the teachers. They know what they need, they know when they're struggling, and just creating the structure where those folks can come together and say, hey, fellow teachers, I'm really struggling with this. Me too. Well, how did you do it? How did you address it? Becomes so much more meaningful than being spoken to regarding what you should or shouldn't do. The reality is, our teachers know what they need to do. We just need to give them the time, which we'll never be able to give them enough time. We need to give them the time to work together to be best by kids. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts that we're having. And I think at the end of the day, even though we may have less days in terms of planning, the frequency in which we're connecting adults to work together will produce a significant outcome. Ms. Becerra, anything else?
Can I just say, Madam Chair, we are supposed to be actively listening and engaging in our board meetings, and it's pretty distracting to have Mr. Barefoot be on the phone and having an individual conversation while, you know, literally, it's very distracting.
Mr. Barefoot, can you hear us? Okay. Who else?
Yeah.
Dr. Schiff?
Just a couple of things. I noticed that from what I heard you saying, one of the significant differences in how school improvement plans are now were being done to how they're now being done is to actually create this as a dynamic document, rather than something that's just created and sits on a shelf, but actually informs policy process and procedure throughout the year. In this, whoops, which I just closed, in this it says that while the process starts just after the previous school year has ended, it doesn't, and a lot of things happen, but by the time we actually get to the full implementation, it's mid-October, which means that implementation starts in October, goes till December, and then there's mid-year course corrections and adjustments. I'm wondering, I understand the challenges in getting things done at the end of a school year and over the summer, but I'm wondering why the school year doesn't start with a school improvement plan in place, why that's not crafted at the end of the previous year, so that in pre-planning, in all of the other things that happen early in the school year, this isn't a process that is immediately implemented. By the middle end of October, we're already engaged in the school year in ways that probably distract or can potentially distract from full implementation, depending on the degree to which policies, procedures may be shifted. So that's question one, and then there's a follow-up.
Yes, and to your point, the work does really happen at the beginning of the school year, but there are, as the beginning of the school year ramps up and they get to know new teachers or they have new students and data comes in, there are tweaks and adjustments, and so that's why it's really beginning to implement the work in phase one, and then we go into what would be like phase two, this full implementation cycle. Because in phase one is where you're also engaging your stakeholders in that work. You want to keep the door open to feedback, that if there are other thoughts and ideas that would require a shift in the work, that you're not starting with a completed plan in the beginning of August, that you're allowing for feedback opportunities from your stakeholders as well. But the work really, even though it is called full implementation in phase two, the work they've been doing the work.
Yeah, so that's not really clear from this, just as an observer, not somebody who's actually doing it.
Yes.
But the way I heard you present it was somewhat different than what you just said. So it would be helpful to know that up front, because what it looks like is the reignite process and the analyze, reflect, identify. is in service of creating a plan, not reflecting on an existing plan to tweak it, given what we may now know in a new year.
Well, they start with a preliminary plan. I should say it that way. It's a preliminary, the action steps that they believe will lead to success, and then they engage the stakeholders and their SAC committees, and all of that happens in the first phase of this work.
So to give it so a school may identify, differentiating instruction and evaluating our data over the summer is an area in which we want to improve upon, how we're going to vary instruction to meet the needs of 25 unique learners in a classroom. The worst thing you can do is go in there and tell a school after a summer break, well, you go and do it this way. The opening presentation and the work that a principal does with the leadership team over the summer is to evaluate the data and say, guys, it's our biggest barrier is how we do differentiated instruction. Let's take that back to our teachers and make sure they agree with us as well. Guys, it's differentiated instruction. Okay, so what do we have to do at our specific school to improve differentiated instruction? Now, Vero Beach can have the exact same differentiated instruction, but how they implement it would be significantly different. The level of thinking applied to the adults in a building allows them to have ownership of how they're going to create the plans to improve that differentiated instruction. So they go in over the summer, they create the barriers that they see through the data, and then the opening of schools really is to begin, all right, it's differentiated instruction. We're going to have our opening professional development. We're going to build ownership or consensus across everyone in the organization to begin to implement. But we're just not, and this is the big shift, because what I explained up to this point is pretty standard, Florida's continuous improvement model, in which all of us who were Florida principals were trained on, we all use. That's where it would stop. Where what we're doing that is significantly different is, okay, now we've been implementing for 2 weeks. How's it going? What's the next week's development for algebra teachers going to look like? What's professional development for English 2 teachers going to look like? 2 different things, same strategy, but based on the skill set or the, as Ms. Rosario was saying, how long they've been teachers, may be significantly different. And that puts them in control, makes them the author of where they need to grow, always receiving feedback from administrators, feedback from coaches, support and creation of professional development aligned to their unique needs. As an example, hey, we're really struggling with transitions. Okay, so next week, I'm the coach, I'm going to come in, I'm going to model transitions for you, or I'm going to do a mini professional development or a mini coaching cycle on transitions. It's just unique and timely to their specific needs. So that's why we shift from a process, which is living, breathing, live in schools, to a plan. A plan is words on a paper that you're going to implement, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. If you struggle with step 1 or step 2, you shouldn't be moving on to step 3. You need to be able to evaluate and encourage and create thinking at schools, and that thinking needs to be as close to kids as possible. And we really, as a system, want to empower those to define their own growth to meet their needs to impact kids. That's the process we're creating.
And
Yes.
question 2, to follow up on that. If a school has set up an improvement plan for itself and is going through this feedback process and can't quite get there, right? What are the kind of implications, consequences, or more like opportunities for improvement when they're not meeting the goals that they set out for themselves or what they believe is possible in their school that then has to be readjusted? How does that work? And I don't know if I said that clearly. So a school has a school improvement plan and it has certain goals in it, right? It has certain opportunities for improvement, it has certain goals. Sometimes those goals are achievable, sometimes they're not.
Correct.
Right? Sometimes those goals persist over time, or those, how is it that I don't like this word, but I'm going to use it anyway. What are the consequences for not being able to achieve those, or for not being able to pull it around in the direction that the school has identified it needs to go?
The work is actually by identifying the goals that they are working towards and this constant reflection on where we are in pursuit of those goals helps us at the district level also to deploy supports. And so that's what happens. Depending on where a certain school is in pursuit of their goals, we may send a higher level of supports that way to help them achieve their goals. But the other thing to keep in mind is this work is ongoing and fluid, and it's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. And just when we accomplish one goal, the next goal will come online. And so there is always going to be work to do. But this really helps us deploy supports to help them along the way as well.
Thank you. Good
And keeps
answer.
the focus on the work.
Yeah, good answer.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Jones?
Thank you, Ms. Basura. First of all, on the articulation agreements, thank you. I think that's very, very important with IRSC. Okay, in real time, I think data comes this Friday, is that right, Dr. Moore? Okay, so when they, as you said, review each other's plans, which I think is excellent, and they look at the data, tell me what they do to change in the school improvement plan because it is fluid. Can you give me an example of what they would do?
Yes, actually, we are in the middle of impact review walks right now as well. So we're starting to gather new data that either affirms what they thought at the beginning of the year based on reflecting on previous data. They're pairing that up with what they're seeing instructionally in the classroom, and they're using that to make adjustments for next steps for phase 2. A great example is in some of our impact review walks, we recognized that we need to put more complex text in front of students.
Right.
And so that came out of knowing our data says one thing, but trying to really dig into almost a root cause of why that data does say that. And so that's going to be, for some of our schools, some next steps that they're adding in just based on walking and observing.
Good. I know the plans for this year are not up yet, so I printed 2 plans from last year, Wabasso and Vero Beach. And when we were talking about vision and mission, it really does align with the school, and this is a good example for the vision for Wabasso, to educate, inspire, and empower our students to succeed in school and community through academic achievement, development of independent living, communication, and social skills in a safe environment. I mean, that's straight on with Wabasso. That's what is needed. And then for Vero Beach High School, a comprehensive high school, it is the responsibility of Vero Beach High School to work together to achieve success for all students. The vision statement is commonly referred to using the short catchphrase, Vero Beach High School, together we achieve success. And I've been on vision and mission teams. It takes a lot of time to do that, and you do need support with the whole team. It's just not written by one person. You go from there. One thing that I do like about this, too, when I was there at School Improvement, we didn't have the data. We had the data at the end of the year for FCAT. Then you start planning. So having this data as often as they do through Unitest, iReady, and now our progress monitoring with the state, that will help our teachers. I think that's important. And just to end with this, what I do like when I call the district office and they say they're out in schools, I hear that quite often, and that's where they should be. Thank you.
Okay,
Quite lonely here.
Mr. Barefoot?
Yeah, I don't know whether you have an echo, but one of the things you find out over the years that the biggest challenge is differentiating between mission and vision. It's very easy to confuse the two. And I always think in terms of mission is what you do every day and vision is what you aspire to. So as long as when these schools are attempting to wordsmith, if that's what they do, their mission and their vision, try not to get the two confused. That's the only thing that I would offer.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Rosario, did you want to make another point?
Yeah, I had two follow-ups based on Dr. Schiff's comments. Work is definitely always fluid. It changes, no doubt, but the goals should always be measurable and attainable. So the goals should always be crafted in a way that principals and instructional leaders know this is a measurable, something that I can measure and something that I can reach and will reach. But so to have a goal where someone doesn't or can't reach it because it's not attainable, shouldn't even be written as a goal. And I know you know that. One of the concerns that I had, a question that I had for Dr. Moore, and probably Ms. Besura as well, when we're talking about common planning and building that into the schedule as we have it now, and teachers meet with their counterparts, their cohorts or their subject area, their like subject area teams in their schools, what happens with the teacher who has multiple preps? That becomes a challenging area, and where there's division, one area would get the benefit of having common preps and the other one would not, so.
So, through the chair, it's a school site decision. One of the things that we've done is, as you know, is to minimize the number of preps a teacher teaches to begin with. So if I can teach English 1, and I can spend all of my time planning for English 1 versus creating a lesson for English 1 and English 2 and then English 3, the depth in which you can go in terms of planning is significantly deeper versus trying to create, with the amount of time that I have, a lesson that meets the needs of all kids. So minimizing the number of preps is a high yield strategy in itself. But then looking, when that isn't the case, working with that specific teacher, where is the opportunity for you to attend which planning, and then how do we design it in a way that meets your specific need, whether it's more of a strategy base versus a content base. So it's really being very unique at each and individual school site to determine what is the best for that specific teacher.
Is there a minimum number of preps that a teacher can have?
So I'd have to look at the contract and give that information to the board. My old district, if you were going to have over 2 preps, you needed to be notified in writing as to why you had more than 2 preps. So it can be done, but just in looking at master schedules when I get here, there are teachers teaching 4 or 5 different preps, and we have rock star teachers. There's just no two ways about it, but it's just almost unfair to a teacher to say, I need for you to plan rigorous, meaningful instruction for all students, teaching 5 different lessons. The reality is we want them to be, going back to what I said earlier in this meeting, we want lessons to be designed to meet the needs of 25 different learners. Man, you can't do that if I got to teach, 4 different contents. It's and there are cases where it has to be done. The smaller the school that you work at, the more preps you're going to have. The larger school that you're at, based on the number of offerings, the less preps you'll have. But we really, as we build schedules, need to minimize preps as best we can.
Yeah, when you're doing the scheduling review and questions this year, especially in terms of class sizes, now that we're on this topic, I would really, I'm curious, and I would really like a little deeper look into the number of preps that our teachers currently have, especially at the high schools, because I've been told that there are multiple teachers who have more than 3 preps. And if that's the case, you're right about not being able to provide high-quality instruction to 1 or 2 particular subjects. Now you're divided, your attention is divided into 3 and 4 different subjects. How would that help us to reach our overall goal of English, math, science, and social studies? So if you could do that and kind of get back with us, maybe get back with us on a good overall where we are in class size and where we are on this as well. And then moving forward, I don't know if there could be a plan. I don't think it would be a policy, unless maybe it would be a policy, depends on board members, to create something that limits the number of preps that students have, that teachers have. That would probably be something that has to be negotiated, but looking at that deeper and making sure that we're not doing that.
Okay, so I have a couple things. Having done this in the old way, I prefer what I see in front of me, this document, which is great. When Dr. Schiff was asking why it was in October, I remember the days when we did it in August, and you were constantly just rechanging the entire thing by October. So I understand how much data has to be gathered, but also getting the buy-in and the ownership from your team and from your faculty is extremely important. Otherwise, this plan sits on the shelf and it's not active and working. So I appreciate that. One thing I noticed, though, I don't think it looked like this. When I saw SAC plans, it was last year or the year before, and I went and spot checked a few. I didn't see the correlation to the strategic plan as much, so appreciate the shifts here, but also the African Achievement Plan. So will those items be put in where the implementation date is, the implementation steps, so we're going to see some things that will directly relate to those?
Yes.
Okay. When we see that, where in there is discipline? Is it under school culture?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to see specific needs to discipline in there. I would encourage board members to spot check those and look at those. It's hard to look at every single plan because when is it we're going to have it? Because I remember last time I had to look at these, it was, I think, the day before and, several plans to look at, so.
Our plan is to have them completed by Friday.
Okay, so we can start looking at them after Friday. The other thing that I noticed in the past was not the correlation from the individual plans to the overall district plan. In other words, they were kind of segmented, they weren't aligned. So we're going to see a better alignment as well. Okay. The SAC teams, are they still adding members?
I believe so, yes. I think that's ongoing.
Okay, yeah, because isn't there, I know when I had to do it when I was a principal, you had to have a certain percentage of numbers, and if you didn't hit that mark, you were given a little call or a visit.
Yes, and one of the items that I presented on were the composition reports.
Okay. For the FSA progress monitoring, you mentioned a comparison of the districts. So will we only see that at the end of the year, or do we not know?
Through the chair, currently, we don't have it at all. So once it becomes available, it just helps us have a deeper understanding of the rate in which we're moving in comparison to other districts. So right now, we have our score. Schools have their schools, and we have an overall state score. And we are we are at the district, the state level, or 1% above it or below it, depending on the grade level. So it's not a good comparison because it's such a large number when you're looking at the state as a whole.
Right, because I think one thing that helps you with progress monitoring, which I think is what the goal of the state moving to this is being able to compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. So in other words, if you're looking at your Algebra 1 ninth graders, you want to be able to look at those Algebra 1 ninth graders comparing to like districts, comparing to the overall state, obviously, but also like districts, right? And is the goal, do you think, then maybe in the next year or the year after to start seeing that data earlier?
Through the chair, that is fully what I expect to see. And that will help us to evaluate the strategies that we're implementing and our ability to respond and accelerate student outcomes in comparison to other districts. The most meaningful way to do that is school site and really linking instructional strategy to the mastery of the standard for the students exposed to that instruction. And that's the level of thinking that that this process supports.
Okay. And the last question I have was, in the past, for us to look at school improvement plans, we had to go on the website and look under each school's website. Is that where we're going to see them again?
We will have a public-facing component for this work, but you'll also get these uploaded to you.
Okay, so board members will get them?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then our final item is Mr. Bass is marrying off his eldest son this week, so we wish him luck if that's a thing you do, marry off your eldest son. You're not doing that yet. So Mr. Fagan will present his items, and staff is here if there's any specific questions or concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. To the board, to the chair of the board, we have 3 items. For what? 3 items. First one is approval to enter a land lease agreement with New Singular Wireless. This would be to lease approximately 2,500 square feet on the southwest portion of Treasure Coast Elementary School for a wireless tower. It's a 15-year lease, renewal for 3 additional 15-year terms. School board will be compensated $2,200 per month. After the second year, that will increase 3%. The area is approximately 2,500 square feet that will be at the rear southeast portion of the school site. Second item is approval to dispose of land for the expansion of the roadway improvements on County Road 510 at 85th and 90th. Approximately .31 acres, or approximately 13,000 square feet, will be sold to the Florida Department of Transportation to widen that road. The district will be compensated $281,000 for that transaction. Last item is to increase a purchase order for the purchase of Vero Beach Elementary School Inclusion Playground. The original quote was higher than the $50,000 at $76,000, so it's requesting approval to increase and approve that purchase. Any questions?
Mr. Rosario?
Yeah, we received some pictures, printouts here. Is this for the playground? Are these for the playgrounds? There are
Through the chair.
multiple, I don't know what I'm looking at, because it's just the pictures.
It's pretty, though.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Hi.
That is the playground primary picture you're looking at. So it's multiple views from different locations in the south.
Okay, so some are in yellow and some are in blue. Is that still the same playground, just different color?
Yeah, it's the same. It's basically multiple
Just different views?
views, yeah.
So I'm sorry. So this is on, these are the ADA compliant.
Yeah, they're ADA compliant, they're also inclusive. So basically it incorporates both inclusivity and ADA compliance, accessibility.
I thought one of the things that we talked about previously were swings as well,
So,
for wheelchairs, you know, and I don't see a lot of that.
yeah, so each school, when we go through the design process, we meet with the ESE department, the school principals, ESE teachers, and the parents. We actually had a student involved in this design process. Since each school kind of has different needs, not every school picks like swings. Some of them have other features. Rosewood, for example, they wanted more surfacing because the kids do more crawling and things of that nature. But they also had wheelchair swings. Vero Beach Elementary didn't really have a requirement for swings, so they selected more of this type of play equipment. So slides, things that they can climb on, the rolling ramp, stuff like that.
Was the student an ESE student?
Yes.
So here's, I mean, buy-in is really, it's fantastic to get everyone's input in it, but ultimately, these students are not going to stay at these schools, many of them, for the duration of their education. They're going to change schools, which means new kids come in the following year. What's to say that we won't get several wheelchairs in a year following, needing then therefore a swing or, something for wheelchairs, wheelchair accessibilities. So what is a current need, I suppose, is not necessarily an overall need, or should that be the overall need of the school in terms of the playground?
Once again, as we put together these, the design teams, really we kind of focus on what the school's needs are. And each playground we've done has been different. Some have had swings, some haven't.
I know.
This would be wheelchair accessible, though. It is designed with ramps to allow children to go up in a wheelchair and use some of the equipment.
Well, I don't see, on the yellow one, I don't see how a student on a wheelchair can use,
The way the
I
surfacing
mean,
is.
they can only just go up
Yeah, they can
one of
go-
the ramps, but they can't do anything else.
There's different features. There's going to be a communication board there. There's things that they can play with as they're on the swing, or on the playground. But once again, I mean, it wasn't really something that the principal, the assistant principal, and the ESE folks felt it was needed for
I know,
that
but I
school.
find that very strange. I'm not so sure that that's the idea of what the board has talked about. With regard to being inclusive, it's allowing all students full access at all times when the need arises. And I don't see I don't see this being wheelchair accessible. And I'm only saying wheelchair because someone on a walker might be able to utilize some of the functions of what we're seeing here in front of us, but
Right.
someone on a wheelchair would not. And again, next year, a particular school might get 3 wheelchairs in, 3 students with wheelchairs, or maybe even 10. I mean, who knows? But right now, right now, one student on a wheelchair would not be able to access anything on here except for a board and going up one little ramp. That's not inclusive for me. Sorry.
Yes, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. One thing we know in Florida, it's very hot. How much did the tarp, how much of that does it cover for the students? It looks like just that one top area.
Yeah, just that top area there.
If we wanted to later, could you expand that, or how does that work?
We could expand it in the future.
Okay.
The cost of the shade covers is just astronomical.
Is
because
it?
of Meeting
Okay.
the wind loads and stuff, so we're seeing prices almost as much as the playground equipment to put shade covers over the
And-
playgrounds. That's why we're trying to use the integrated shades wherever possible.
Okay, and obviously you brought this because there was just, it went up from 50, I think, to 76. Is that just costs in general?
Yes, costs are going up. So we're seeing cost escalation and supply chain disruptions that are taking longer to get the equipment.
So not only.
This actually has a rubber surfacing too.
Yeah,
so there's-
I've seen those rubber surfaces.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
interlocking rubber.
So if we wanted to add something later, if we needed to, I mean, depending on the change of the students, or?
Yeah, we could expand the footprint.
Okay.
And this is actually going to go on the south side of the school. There's a concrete slab there now, so this is going to be
Yes.
utilizing that concrete slab.
Got it, okay, I
Uh,
know where that is, okay, thank you.
Dr. Schiff.
Yeah, I actually had the same observation as Mrs. Rosario, that where there's one ramp for a wheelchair or a walker, it then goes into stairs, which makes it inaccessible again. So I'm wondering, on this, what exactly are the accessible features that shift it from previous playgrounds we've done? And if you could walk us through, because I don't know that I'm seeing it.
Well, once again, I mean, inclusivity doesn't mean specific to one.
Of course not, which is why
acuity.
I'm asking you to explain,
Yeah.
because I'm not sure I'm seeing all of the inclusive features.
They have the gyro spinner on the side. I mean, that, with assistance, the children can play with that. It really wasn't designed for somebody in a wheelchair. But once again, with the design process, we use the students that are there and what the principal's needs are. As you look at the inclusive playgrounds we've done, not all of them have had wheelchair swings.
Right, and so I completely agree with you, a wheelchair is not the only thing. It's the one that stands out most obviously, but that's why I'm asking for some clarification, because I'm clear in this, there's things I'm not seeing that have it fit the requirements of an inclusive playground or the needs of students that aren't obvious to me here. So that's why I'm asking you to walk me through it.
Well, you have the, once again, it wasn't designed for somebody in a wheelchair, so other than the communication board and, just the fact that they can access the ramp and play with other children there isn't things that, there's not a wheelchair swing. Really, somebody in a wheelchair would only be able to use a wheelchair swing. The communication board, they would be able to use.
There are also many students who have mobility issues that aren't in wheelchairs, right? Mobility covers a wide range of ability.
Yes.
And so even if somebody is not in a wheelchair, things like swings or things that make it easy for people with less than full mobility seems to me would be would be issues of inclusivity. And from what I'm hearing you saying, and I'm not trying to make this difficult, but what I'm hearing you saying is that the needs of the school didn't identify certain inclusivity needs as a priority. So what we have is one ramp and I forget what you call it, the thing that's hanging down on the side, swinging
Yeah,
down.
yeah, the gyro
That's called. Say that again?
spinner, a gyro spinner.
That, the
Yeah, they have
gyro
gyro
spinner.
spinner.
No wonder I didn't remember
Yeah,
it.
and they have a roller slide, which is real popular with the kids, so it's in.
A roller slide.
Yeah.
And what is that and what
It's
is it?
basically a slide the kids go down, and it has a bunch of wheels on it that allow them to it gives them a kind of a different sensation than a smooth slide.
And how does that reflect inclusivity?
It's a sensory device, so as they're going down the slide, it's allows them that
I
sensory.
guess what would be helpful here, because just seeing the pictures and just seeing the bill doesn't tell me how this playground significantly differs from a regular playground, where and what costs are incurred by making it inclusive, and how we're including as many different neurotypical options as possible.
Well, once again, you do have the boards, if you look at the
Or
front page.
neurotypical, I should have said.
Right. So you have the communication boards and the sensory boards when you first enter it. So on page one of the rendering, as you go up the ramp, you can see the devices to the sides. And then you have the roller slide, which, let's see if we have a better view of it. It's actually on the fifth slide, I'm sorry. Look at the slide that's coming off, the gyro spinners to the left, and then that slide that's coming down is the roller slide, which is a sensory device.
Was this designed in consultation with families who need an inclusive playground, or what their specific needs or wants would be?
Yeah, the design team was basically the principal, the assistant principal who know, and the ESE teachers in that school who know the population of their school. They brought in one student, they brought in a parent to review the designs, and then the playground designer.
So we were limited on student and parent input on this one, it sounds like.
Well, primarily, that's how we do these processes. The principals bring in the people that they want to be involved in the process. I mean, it's
Right.
kind of standard.
I appreciate the hard work on it. I appreciate the intent to do something as inclusive as possible. I'd like to be able to see it better, because I'm not fully seeing in this how it differs from with the exception of really two possible things, because I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the words, but the boards on
So
the
you
side.
have, you have the sensory boards.
The sensory boards are not uncommon in traditional playgrounds as well.
Sure, the whole idea of inclusivity, though, is that it's not just for students with needs, it's students with needs and regular kids playing together.
Exactly, exactly. And the point is that the neurotypical kids have many, many options available to them, and the neuroatypical kids don't. So while it's not meant, the absolute express purpose is not to exclude anybody. That's the whole point, right? So it's including neurotypical kids and it's including neuroatypical, or however, whatever is the right way to say that word, on non-neurotypical kids.
So, Madam Chair, hearing, this is why you do workshop, right? So hearing board feedback, we can go back, look at the item, and then bring it back at the most appropriate time. I think that's
Thank
probably the.
I have some suggestions too, if I
Oh,
can.
well,
Okay.
I haven't received your suggestions yet, but once we see it, we can go back and reevaluate, almost creating from a district perspective a standard in terms of what is to be expected as we bring these items.
Yeah, I don't think we should be redesigning totally right from the dais, but I think giving you some feedback is appropriate. Ms. Rosario?
Yeah, I'm glad, Dr. Moore, that you're going to take this back. I wish I would have had the opportunity to see these designs prior to today. I would have been able to give you my feedback prior to this presentation. But yeah, this does not, the regular process, the idea of creating inclusive playgrounds, the conversation that board members have had in the past was specific to students with special needs. We're not including students with special needs in our playground development and providing opportunities for them. And you're right, it's not just children in wheelchair, but it does include children in wheelchairs. It's not just children who have sensory needs, but it does include them as well. Students who have special sensory needs, students who are autistic may not want to go on the slide with the rollers. You know, that might be too much tactile for them. Students who are deaf and hard of hearing, I don't see anything in this playground to attract our students who are visually impaired. I don't see much difference, and Dr. Schiff is right in just by looking at it, where it doesn't look very different from the regular playgrounds that we have now. The one thing that you mentioned was the foam bottom, what is that called?
It's interlocking rubber tiles.
Okay, the
That's what you use.
interlocking rubber tiles, foam, wheelchairs don't,
They do. This is designed for rollability.
okay.
These are actually ramps. This is actually beveled all around.
Yeah, so
corners
there
that,
are some other
it's accessible
things,
from every corner.
thank you, there are some other things like symbol and communication boards, there are these little blocks.
Yeah, they're on there. If you go, that's why there's different renderings.
It's
If you
just
go
an X
to-
and an O.
I'm sorry?
I only see an X and an O to play tic-tac-toe. But the symbol communication boards have more. They have raised symbols, they have shapes and sizes and numbers.
Yeah, that's what's there. If you look at the page R5, I guess it is. At the southeast view,
R5,
yeah.
I see R5.
If you keep going back through, you'll see like a yellow-looking rendering.
Yeah, it's right here, I got it.
So the southeast view shows, I believe, what you're asking.
Look how high that is. Someone in a wheelchair wouldn't be able to reach that. A student walking on a walker won't be able to balance correctly to touch the tactile, those tiles that are up there. That's a concern. I mean, we can have crawl tunnels that are low enough for students with special needs, all students with special needs to be able to get through. Sensory panels at children's eye level length, I'm assuming that we're talking about elementary and middle school students. There are other unique structures that are available for students. I mean, the seesaws, right? If we had students with wheelchairs, they can wheel their chair onto a seesaw that would actually be able to bring them back and forth. There are these little seats that look like round, just a round disc that students can sit on and just kind of swivel back and forth on it. So it gives them the sensation of being on a swing, but it's not really a swing. I mean, there's so many other different things for us to be able to include in this that I don't see here available for children with special needs. So I'm glad, Dr. Moore, you're going to take this back. I would be more than happy to share with you some suggestions. I can send you a site that is actually called inclusiveplaygrounds.net. I think I may have sent it to you before. And it's really, it has a lot, even sandboxes. Sandboxes at students' level where they can roll up a wheelchair and they can play in the sandbox and manipulate, things within a sandbox. That's inclusive and, brings all children of all needs. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have been nice to see this earlier, but a couple months ago, I was able to take my grandson to a playground that was an inclusive playground. I want to say it was somewhere in Atlanta area, and it was amazing. I've never seen some of the stuff that was there, but it was huge, and it was probably extremely expensive. So
It
I
was,
understand.
yes.
Yeah, I understand the cost.
Yeah.
But I can see where a couple of shifts could happen. Like, for example, on the fourth page, that tic-tac-toe, is that accessible if they go up the ramp and around?
It is.
Even if they're in a wheelchair, though, they're going to have to go way down to play that game, you know what I mean? So if that was just, that part of it was shifted down to the bottom, then it could be inclusive of any child.
Right.
Easy shift, right? So if you look at R5, and go back to that one, there's a good picture of it there, because I was looking to see whether or not they can get to it. Even if I'm in a wheelchair, I'm going to have to go way down here to get to play that game. So, I understand you got input, and I appreciate that. Question is, like, I remember teaching autistic children in this district, and you never know from year to year what needs children have. So we need to think outside the box as far as in future generations, not just the ones that are there that want to pick the cool things they want to play on. We need to think about all kids. I agree with the swing. I think we need to add a swing at every school. And there are some, I know cost, whatever, or opportunity to add a swing later when we get more money, but I'd like to at least have that in the plan for the future so that we have that inclusivity of a swing for all children. And the autistic children, I see some sensory boards, I see some other things, but I don't know how much we've taken the needs of kids like deaf children, blind children, autistic children. Were they all a part of this plan?
Well, once again, I rely on the principal and the assistant principal to have the knowledge of what their needs are at their schools.
But did we talk to our ESE department at
Yes, ESE was
the
involved.
district level that are responsible for deaf children, blind children?
Yeah, Ms. Morey and Ms. Robb were involved in the process. So,
Okay,
yeah, everything we're doing with these designs, like I say, once again, each school we've done has been different, and we've really allowed the school to kind of tell us what their needs are, simply because of the cost. I mean, the playgrounds you're describing are $500,000-$600,000 playgrounds.
oh, I'm sure.
So we're trying to add
This is
things.
the most impressive playground I've ever seen in my life. It was a very nice area of Atlanta, so I'm sure that that town could afford that
Yeah.
playground. But I'd never seen some of the equipment before that I saw there. And there was a child that was in a wheelchair there while we were there and able to play on a lot of it. So I thought that was really neat to be able to see that. If we could just get a couple of those pieces, that would be great.
Yeah, we don't want to design something, too, that's going to not be used. If they don't have children that are going to use those features, they really become a waste of money to spend on them in the moment. So
They'll use
But
it.
but
they
it
could always
wasn't,
be added.
it was designed so it could have been an able-bodied child using it as well.
Yes.
That's why it was inclusive, because any child could use it, not just one particular child.
Yes,
I think that's where we're all going with this. Dr. Jones?
100%.
I remember it was with Cindy Emerson and Laura Moss and Stacy Clem when we were talking about the Jimmy Gray's inclusive playground. And one thing they really talked about was the swing that the student in the wheelchair could get into. So, I think that is certainly available, and it could be used for all children, but those children specifically. And that's a big thing to me, too, as far as making sure the students in the wheelchair have some opportunities and the protection from the sun, too. Thank you.
I think we have an opportunity to do this right. And in the past, I asked Mr. Teskey this because I remember him bringing items to us before in his previous position where he would say, well, we've got to move the handicap swings to this school because we have a child in need of it. And I said, what's the cost of doing that every year to do that and move equipment around? And it was a high cost. So if we're looking at putting this in the right way, let's do it the right way. And I know you're limited with cost, I get that, but we've really got to think about it. What makes this a unique playground? And you said it was on the south side of
Yes.
Vero
yeah.
Beach Elementary? The south side is
Yeah, the south
road.
side's, well, actually, it's on the north side, so it's
That's
in
what I thought.
between the
It's-
area where the,
I know the spot where it's
yeah,
going to go.
the greenhouses are and stuff like that.
No,
So
where
it's-
the greenhouses are, or when you pull up around the circle and it's to the right there?
Now, it's more where the greenhouses are. There's a concrete slab in the
back.
back of the building, and we're going to
Okay.
utilize that concrete slab, which has been,
All right, well, the
Not
principal
used for
showed me
many
the spot,
years,
and
so.
obviously it's changed. Okay. So I know we talked about accessibility for playgrounds after school and weekends, and we have an issue with security, I get that, but are we thinking about that in the future for where we're putting these on properties?
we do, but we also think about, the safety of the students. We don't want them too close to roadways, things where, they're accessible for someone to hop a fence or be able to see the kids out there playing. So where this is located, it's actually, there's cameras there. It's kind of tucked in an area that's a bit more protected than the 20th Street playground, which is
Okay.
very visible from the street.
Okay, back to the drawing board.
My brain is just, it's all over the place. So a while back, I had a conversation with one of our county commissioners on this particular topic and why the county hasn't provided more playgrounds that are inclusive in our county, right? I think just recently, and then I was told in this conversation, oh, well, we just created one new playground in Sebastian, somewhere in Sebastian, it was new at the time. And I said, well, are there any, wheelchair accessible? not saying that we have a lot of wheelchair needs, but even if you have one, it's still our responsibility to provide access to a playground as a school district, right? And so in the count, it just didn't go anywhere. Long story short, it didn't go anywhere, which is pretty shocking. Why in our county we do not have a playground that is accessible to students of all needs. That said, we did prioritize, we did say, boards, I think it was pretty unanimous, to at some point consider having the communities have access to these accessible, inclusive playgrounds outside of school hours. So on that, I certainly agree with Mrs. Berenborg to reiterate the need to be able to have those discussions as well, where they're located, how, and I'm not suggesting that we should allow all of our playgrounds, to have access because of the security issues, but certainly if we can have a discussion as to, maybe south, central located or a north location or something to that effect. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was, or a question, do we know, and you probably don't know now, but do we know how many children are in wheelchairs? I mean, because I know the wheelchair conversation keeps coming up. Do we know how many children are in wheelchairs in our district? Probably not, right?
Through the chair, not off the top of our head, I don't think it would be Bob who would have that information, but I can get our best number to the board, and specifically, the majority of those students would probably be at Wabasso.
Okay. Wabasso was one of those schools that even I went, which is probably another topic of conversation, which is why I said, how come they do not have a more inclusive playground? They have a playground, but it's certainly not as inclusive as I would like for them to have. And I think that school would be more deserving of if any, to have a fully inclusive playground. But that said, even though we may not have a lot of students where one might say it's not justifiable to include a swing for a wheelchair, my personal opinion on that is I really don't care. If we have one student who might be in a wheelchair, who might not ever experience a swing in our county, I'd like one school of ours to at least have it. And if I can plan ahead and say the possibility of this particular school having 5 wheelchairs would be enough for me to say, I'm glad we put that wheelchair swing in. Maybe partnering with local, businesses who can sponsor the swing. Schools are sponsored by local businesses all over our county. We have now churches that are involved in adopting schools. Maybe churches can do a fundraising event or, offer to sponsor a swing or a slide or something to that effect, whatever it might be. I just think that that is something that this board has unanimously agreed. The other thing I would say is, board members, we set the goals, we set the financial vision, we agree to what is a priority in this district. And if we agreed, having balloons in a school were a priority, then it's up to the superintendent to make sure that that happens, and Mr. Fagan to move things around and make sure that that happens. If there's something that is not a priority, but has already been approved financially, we can certainly amend it. But if the board is suggesting that something is a priority or that we are all in agreement on a particular item, such as this one for sure, then it should move forward. I mean, we should make it happen. Just make it happen.
Okay, so I think you have some direction. You've heard loud and clear.
Got it.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. That does exhaust my superintendent's presentations. There is one other item which was put on there at the request of the board proper at our last business meeting, which was the attorney contract evaluation system. So I don't know if I turn it over to you, Madam Chair. or
Sure.
Ms.
Did everyone get a copy of this contract with our attorneys? I know I have one.
What are you talking about?
The contract that we have for our
Yes,
attorney.
and it was in the backup item
Right.
from the previous.
If you look on page 2, option 2, you'll see it's a 5-year agreement. I know that there was a comment made that it was a 1-year agreement at our last board meeting, but you'll know here that it's a 5-year agreement. I thought it was a 3-year agreement. I learned after reading this, it was a 5-year agreement. The other thing that is of note here is that our agreement is with the firm, not with the attorney. Okay, so those are 2 things I wanted to point out before we go ahead, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Jacobs.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
maybe before we go into this segment, we could take a quick break.
Well, I was going to do that at the 2-hour mark, but would you like to do it now?
Well, it just seems a logical stopping point
Okay.
before we.
We'll take a
go
little
into-
break. You want 10 minutes?
It's fine.
We'll do 10 minutes. It's 1:40. We'll come back at 1:50. board meeting. I just want to make a point that, thank you, Ms. Esplin, for making a copy of the contract with the agreement between our attorney's firm and the school district. So everybody has a copy of that now. Okay, it's all you.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm going to start out first, as I do with any time I facilitate, with the norms, and we use these during the development of our board protocols. So those norms are three very simple things: equity and voice. And so the structure that I'll use today will be very similar to our previous sessions, in which I'll actually be starting out with Ms. Rosario, as she was the one who brought this item forward, and then we'll use a round robin process of providing feedback for any points that we discussed today. And respectfulness in spirit and balance in perspective. So I know that in preparation for this particular session, I went back and rewatched the previous discussion on the attorney evaluation process that was proposed to be discussed. Based upon that discussion, I took different points that board members made during that discussion as questions either that they had or areas in which needed to be clarified in order to determine how we move forward with the process. So just on this particular easel here, I have number one of the questions was, should we have a formal evaluation tool, yes or no? So that kind of morphed out of the discussion in which an evaluation tool template was brought forward. And then there were some questions about, should we have one and what should the structure be? The next question was, which Ms. Berenborg alluded to, was, are we evaluating the firm or an individual? So we have our general counsel, but we have a contract with a firm. And so that question was in reference to the evaluation tool and how that should be developed, knowing that. Also, there were some considerations about timeline. And the timeline, if there was in fact an evaluation that was conducted, what do we need to keep at the forefront of our minds whenever we're making that timeline? So if at some point in the future we want to do this evaluation, how do we backwards design this process to make sure that we are doing what we intend we are saying we want to do? One piece of information is that within the contract, I did review, and there is a 5-year contract in place right now. That contract was initiated on 11/29/21, so essentially in December, the firm started with the district, so we're just shy of a year of receiving services with the firm. Also, one of the questions that came out of the discussion was that whole idea of being able to preview the evaluation tool. So at the last board discussion, there were questions by board members at what point in time, if we did do this evaluation, would that evaluation take place? Would it take place before we have another board cycle? Would it take place after a year after that board cycle? The new board members or the board seating happens in November. And one of the things that is raised out of there is generally when you do an evaluation of an employee, they have the opportunity to preview that instrument well in advance of that instrument being used to evaluate that employee. And so that's another consideration for as far as timing goes. And then finally, the board member cycle. As you know, we're going to start a new cycle in November. And so that board, at least one of those seats is going to be different than it is now. And then finally, the structure of the tool. And so until we answer some of these questions on top, I think that whole idea of a structure of the tool will be harder to discuss. Ms. Rosario did share with us a template of an evaluation tool using, I believe, some of the information from Brevard County, as board members said that they did like some of the information in there. So we'll start with evaluation tool, yes or no. So the question is, are we Number one, do we want an evaluation tool, and is that a formal or informal process? So, Ms. Rosario, if you'd like to start, since this is your item.
I would say yes, and
Okay.
yes to being formal.
Okay, all right. Doc Jones?
What were the two questions again?
Would we like an evaluation tool, and should that process be formal or informal?
Some kind of evaluation tool, but informal.
Okay. Dr. Schiff?
This is informed by what you just said, because I think you raised some important points. I think, yes, there should be a tool. I think, yes, it should be formal, but I think that when a person is hired, they should know the criteria on which they're being evaluated, which was not what happened in this process. So I think that conversation has to happen before the other two conversations. But in principle, I would agree to a formal evaluation tool.
Ms. Bearmore? Oh, Mr. Barefoot?
I agree with what Dr. Schiff just said.
Okay, so some conversation prior to if we do institute a formal evaluation tool. Ms. Berenborg?
Yeah, I think we should have an evaluation tool of the firm, not of the individual. So I know we're getting to that, but I feel very clearly because we have a contract with the firm. We don't have a contract with an individual. That's different between an in-house and an out-of-house.
Okay.
So keeping that in mind, we have an out-of-house, not an in-house attorney. So I agree that we should have some sort of evaluation of the firm. I agree that when you get hired or you enter into a contract, that you understand all the parameters of how you're going to be evaluated by that contract. So I think we have to be a little careful on how we do this. But I agree. You can have informal evaluations of an individual one-on-one, but maybe a formal in the public because we can't talk to each other.
Okay, all right. I saw Dr. Jones had her hand up.
And when I say informal, this is what I think about. You know, you look at the areas of assessment and these 5 areas that were on there. And again, I like the Brevard County one, but the communication, legal knowledge, organization, professional, school board. You know, I see me meeting with the superintendent and the firm to talk about that one-on-one. Because any kind of evaluation, first of all, you have to know what the evaluation is. You cannot go in there cold. I mean, that would never work. And number 2, any type of evaluation is where you want to see what areas of concerns you have and how do they grow from there. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper. And with a 5-year contract, obviously we have some room to look at that. And don't we also have in there you can be dismissed in 30 days?
Mm-hmm.
Like if there's an action item, so.
I underlined it in here.
Okay,
So you have it.
if there's an action item and then the board can vote on it, obviously if there's an issue. But when I say informal, I'm talking to the superintendent and the firm, the attorneys that are there representing them, and just saying the information that I'd like to share them one-on-one, and then look at it to see it, okay, these are working well, these are not working well. So just have a dialogue on where we need to go as far as evaluation.
Okay, so with that, Dr. Jones, just so I'm understanding correctly, are you saying that a tool would still be used as part of that conversation, or a tool would not be used as part of that conversation?
When I say tool, we've got to look, they've got to know what we're doing.
Okay.
So the areas of assessment, if you want to call them, the areas of growth, areas of required areas, you know, you have that. There's all kinds of tools now with teachers, you know, but for our beginning teachers, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to improve, and a lot in our professional tenured teachers are looking at growth. What can we do for growth? So there's got to be some kind of tool.
All right. So overwhelmingly, it sounds like, yes, we're saying, yes, it would be helpful to have an evaluation tool. So the next question, I think will help me in guiding possibly next steps, is this evaluation tool to be used with the firm or with the individual who is serving as general counsel for the firm? So Ms. Rosario.
No, I think yes and no. I think there should be a component of both on this tool because they are both uniquely providing different services. The school board attorney that serves at our board meetings primarily serves as parliamentary. And that work alone and helping us craft policy or help with anything that the board needs as our employee is quite different than what another attorney might help the superintendent in the daily operations, for example, with public records requests or anything in terms of litigation or some other function that they might provide. So I think they're different, even though there's one contractor, there are different services. So I would say we should have both. What's iffy here in this, admittedly, is that what does that look like, because we have an outline. But what would happen if one is recommended not to return and the other one is, or vice versa? And that's what's not clear.
Okay.
I mean, we all agree that there should be a tool. I don't want to get off of the topic, but I do think that they are different. So maybe having one portion as firm and one portion as, school board attorney, and the work that the school board attorney does directly with us, identify them differently
Okay.
in this tool.
All right. So what I'm hearing, yes, is a combined tool, but the tool has the more global services of the firm, and then the school board attorney is a subset within that tool.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that because Dr. Jones mentioned something that I am in agreement, because the first three, let me pull it up. The first three categories on this template, this sample template, apart from communication, because there are some parts of communication that a board attorney is responsible for with the board, right? Communicating with us and making sure, and communicating with possible constituents if needed. But overall, legal services and communication there and organization and management, I think what Dr. Jones was referring to was that could be maybe, overall firm evaluation items, and then maybe the other school board attorney items or something like that.
Made note of that. Dr. Jones.
When I look, this may be a question for the attorney. When I look at our agreement on November 29, 2021, the agreement is with Sniffen and Spellman. So, I don't know, does that make a difference as far as putting their overall broad name versus different attorney names? I don't know. Matt, do you have, may I ask a question? How many school boards does your firm work with?
In this capacity, I think in any given couple-year period, we probably work with 40 or 50 school boards.
40 or 50, but in
Yeah.
this capacity where you have a
In this
contract?
capacity, where
Okay.
we serve as the Monday night /
Got it.
Tuesday night, I should have known this, so I apologize.
That's all
I think
right.
it's 6 or 7.
Okay. And how many of them have the an evaluation tool, if you will?
I mean, anything formal, like you would an employee, I don't think any of them do.
Okay. And that's one reason I said that. When I looked at that and was brought forward last time, and we had a little bit of time to look at the different counties, but I look at it as informal, talking with the superintendent and that attorney's firm to see what areas we think, we're doing well and what we could improve upon. Because any kind of evaluation, you never want it to be a gotcha, never. They have to know what's coming. They have to know what we expect. So I think that can be done informally. And then, of course, evaluations are public record. They can always see that. But Again, we have to look at, are we going to write it down? What does it look like? I know that's discussion, so.
Right, and then as far as feedback, Dr. Jones, firm versus individual?
Right now, when I look at the contract, I'm saying firm.
Okay. Dr. Schiff?
I agree with my colleagues. I don't have a different opinion. We could separate out attorney and firm. Again, how we do that, though, both the attorney and the firm should be aware of the criteria by which they're being evaluated. And as that didn't happen when we hired this firm, we have to make some decisions about how that will move forward.
Okay. Mr. Barefoot?
There's really, there's nothing that's been said that I disagree with. I do think, and I think I mentioned this at the meeting when we spent a lot of time talking, that if there is a particular attorney, for example, the attorney working with Dr. Moore and Dr. Jones is involved in this on the NAACP federal lawsuit, if both the good and the bad or the improvement can be discussed between those who are in use of those services, I don't think it's appropriate to have that discussion in public. And I would say the same thing with the quote unquote school board attorney. If there's things that he or she does well or things that he or she needs to improve upon, those are conversations that should take place in public or in private, just like you would with any other person, in this case, a contracted employee. As far as the timing, in this particular case, it hasn't even been a year yet, so I think it's great to talk about a process, but it's premature to attempt at any evaluation under whatever set of criteria you want to use.
Thank you. Ms. Berenborg?
Sure. First of all, Ms. Shattuck is not our employee. She is your employee. And so, your firm's employee, thank you. I meant you as in the firm. You're representing the firm today. So our contract is with the firm. I firmly believe that we evaluate the firm and what services they provide us formally. Informally, we can have conversations one-on-one with the attorney, but we can also have it with the firm and say, you know, we have concerns, or if we had a concern, we could say, you know, we have a concern and discuss that with the firm. And there's a way that you can do that. We do that with any contractor, right? If we have a problem with a subcontractor or an employee of a contractor, we discuss it with the contractor, correct? Okay. Excuse me. That's the way I'm looking at it.
Okay. So I heard two things. I heard both firm, combination, or just the firm, and then the firm actually addresses that with their employee, or that information is more informally shared with the individual employees. So I'd like to, given what Ms. Berenborg has said, Ms. Rosario, could you provide any feedback after hearing what Ms. Berenborg has just said about providing the firm the formal evaluation, but then maybe informally providing the more specific feedback regarding specific attorneys that we work with, because Ms. Shattuck isn't the only one. We work with more than just her.
Yeah, but we don't, this board does not directly work with other attorneys.
Yes, we do.
No, this board does, our number one contact has been Molly. Dr. Moore has worked with the firm and other attorneys. This board primarily has only worked with Ms. Shattuck. She is the listed, what is she listed here as? Contact. She's the one that we interviewed when she came, when the firm presented their interest. She is the contact and the title. At that interview, she said that she would be the board's attorney. She is the board's attorney, even though we have contracted with the firm. I mean, that's not, we're just splicing hairs on the wording here. But ultimately, if we are not satisfied with the services that is provided by the board's attorney, in this case, Ms. Shattuck, we would need a process of which to let her know and let the firm know. And that's what this is all about. We don't have that in place. We need something. We can certainly allow Dr. Moore, if he's willing, to have further conversations with the firm to establish and let them know that we did not consider an evaluation when at hiring, but we are now considering that, evaluation process or a tool moving forward. But nonetheless, we still need something something to have. And this is all new to this board too. I mean, even as I know that it's been my item for the last 3 attempts. Prior to that, I know that Dr. Schiff, as I mentioned previously, shared some of the documents that are on there at our last meetings. Backup, some of those came from Dr. Schiff from a previous sharing back in, I think, 2018 or 2019. It's been a while. It's always been something that we have discussed, that there is a need for a tool to evaluate the school board attorney. Whatever that would look like, this is now, we're having the discussion. So I do realize that it is odd because she is not an in-house attorney, but nonetheless, we still need something. And so I'm not hanging my hat on, whether it's formal or informal. We just need a tool to get started. We need to be able to provide feedback in terms of communication, in terms of our satisfaction as parliamentarian, as far as guidance on legal issues, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, somebody mentioned it, I don't even know who it was. Truly, I mean, the direct impact of some of the legal services that's provided directly to Dr. Moore, that's something that Dr. Moore would be able to give the board feedback on, because we're not involved in those daily conversations. What I have heard is that even in the area of public records, the advice from the area of public records has improved drastically lately. But again, that's something that is day-to-day operations, not something that the board directly handles on a regular basis. Not saying that we don't, have impact or, have a input on, but we still need some, tool, something to provide. And yes, sorry.
So I think you said cutting hairs here, and I think what I'm hearing the board said is, yes, we need your 5 individual board members who serve as the school board of Indian River County. You have a contract with a law firm that is in place for 5 years, 4 more years remaining. There is the opportunity for both parties in that contract to exercise a way out. You as a board, 5 individuals, could take a vote saying we want to exercise that, meaning we're going to give them notice in 90 days. We will go through the process of finding a new law firm. What you really are evaluating is the impact of services being provided, whether it be Molly or other members of the firm. And then how do you, as 5 individuals, have that conversation both individually with Molly, which I think is the right thing to do privately, as well as feedback from me regarding everything else, or me and Molly, to be honest with you, regarding all of the other services that are in fact provided. And Ms. Rosario is right. I'm the CEO. I work intimately with Molly, with Matt, and other legal services that are provided that extend significantly beyond Molly. So that is what you're truly evaluating, is how do we have that conversation individually to come together as the board as a whole to say, all right, guys, ladies, gentlemen, we've provided our feedback, and I think I am obligated to give feedback to Molly, as I often do. I think you are obligated to do that. I think there should be a standing item on an agenda at least once a year, whenever you all say it's proper to say, hey, guys, let's take this protocol, this tool, and facilitate a conversation or dialogue with our board attorney. You have that conversation. That helps you have a focused conversation around the identified areas, a number of which Ms. Rosario just kind of rambled off, regarding the areas of work done under the confines of that contract. And now, do we want to exercise anything? Are we good for another year or 2 years? And then if you're good, you're good. But I don't prescribe to the school of which you don't do anything. And I think that is what it used to be. And I think the desire of the board here is to say, you know, we have a contract. We are receiving services, right? She's not our employee. She is the representative of the firm that sits on this firm. We need to evaluate the services that are being provided. And I don't think that's anything outside the confines of the contract. I think that you all as a board figuring out how you're going to uphold all of the requirements that Florida statute puts on you on how you all have to conversate with individuals or with each other. And it is saying, all right, here's a tool, here's the criteria in which we want to have a conversation individually to collect our thoughts around what is pre-agreed upon. So when we come back together, now we can have a board conversation to determine we are satisfied with the services and we have, in good faith, provided communication individually regarding what we may say publicly. And I think that's kind of where you're wanting to go to. I would be more than happy, based on some of the information you have provided, the Brevard model, put together some of those things to bring back to the board and saying, all right, these are the areas in which you want to facilitate that specific conversation. This is the time frame annually in which you'll have those things, have those conversations both individually. So as you sit board proper or as a whole, now you can facilitate that conversation. And it's not like I spoke to the lawyer about this or I spoke to the lawyer about that. It's a focused conversation. It is evaluating the contract, and there's nothing wrong with evaluating a contract, and we don't need permission from the firm to evaluate the services being provided, but you guys are 5 individuals who can't talk privately.
Right.
So, and that really is the dilemma in which we're trying to address. We have a structure in place. The structure works extremely well. Guinea pig, you use it on me. And I say that in the most affectionate way. That you have it and then we come back. Now the variation here, but it's really not a variation, is as you're evaluating me, I'm dependent upon Ron on focus area 5. I'm dependent on Kelly on focus area 2. I'm focus area 4 or 4. I'm dependent upon Ms. Maddox. So it depends on, those are the folks who do the work. Molly has folks who do the work as well. So it's creating a fair and consistent way of communicating the expectations that have been mutually agreed upon within the contract to have a conversation. So when you guys come back, the recipient of those 5 different conversations were structured in the same way upon the elements of the specific contract. Each of you, and I know this because I have the benefit of meeting with each of you individually, all have really good feedback and constructive and needs to be provided in a caring, nurturing way that grows the system. Each of you has significant praises in terms of that body of work. I have significant praises for this body of work, and you all know how I feel. As well as opportunities to improve. So to me, I think we're hung up on evaluation. Yes, this is an evaluation. You're evaluating the services being provided, and you need to figure out how to do it without breaking any sunshine violations, and you all want to do it in the most proper, transparent, ethical way, where you're not blindsided. Each and every single one of you have said, I don't want to do something on public. Ms. Berenborg, you say you talk into, how do you say it? You say something in private.
Punish in private, praise in public.
Right. And you all, each of you have said very, very similar things. Dr. Jones just said something similar to that early. I think my role with Dr. Jacobs' assistance is to collect some of the feedback that you have, put together, this is the areas that is within the contract that we need to evaluate. This is my feedback because 70% of this work is associated directly with me or for folks who are on my cabinet. So you have all of that. I don't think I have successfully communicated all of that. Some of it I have, other pieces I have not. And that would be a structure I would have to. All right, how do I get this from Ron? How do I get this from Scott? That would have to be created. But bring that back up so you have through this protocol tool evaluation, call it what you will, but there is a structured way to facilitate the conversation individually. So when you as a board has the conversation, you're fully informed to make the right decision.
Ms. Rosario.
I appreciate that. I would be 100% on board with what you are proposing. I would like to just add that, when we talk about evaluations, it's often one's first impression to say hire or fire, right? Keep, retain, or let go. And that's normal because that's what we know of evaluations. But you hit on something, evaluations also provide the feedback for growth. And if board members are not receiving, just in terms of board members, if we are not receiving the services at our expectations or whatever that might be, it would be important for us to be able to express that. Without this tool in place or a tool in place, or an avenue for being able to do that, we wouldn't be able to. I mean, it would just be, one-on-one, and it would fall on deaf ears, and nothing would really change. So I appreciate that. I'm willing to do that. If you want to do that, if board members agree, I'm willing to do that as well. I just wanted to say in terms of priorities, because you said give feedback. I don't know if I'm going ahead of you. I think as a board member, my number one priority, not that the other areas are not important, but number 5, I think directly impacts board members specifically. That is the areas of being present at board workshops, board meetings, providing board counsel, board policy, policy revision process, and serving as the parliamentarian, that sort of thing. Those areas of work directly affect us.
That noted. Dr. Jones.
I think number 11 in the contract is clear as far as cancellation and termination. So that's clear. If anything is violated from the agreement, and then cancellation can be provided in writing with 90 days of advance notice. I probably did over 1,000 evaluations, and I never looked at it, okay, fire this. It's looking at what can I do to help this student, this teacher, student when I was a teacher, to be successful, or this assistant principal. So my question here, Dr. Jacobson, Dr. Moore, is that timeline is very important. It'd be about a year, but let's make sure we get the timeline right. So whatever we develop with what Dr. Moore just said, making sure that Sniffen and Spellman have that information, because one of the things, as you do in evaluations, a lot of time is they do self-evaluation. How do I think I'm doing here? And that helps when you have the dialogue with the evaluation. So, Dr. Moore, even what are you thinking about a timeline here as far as getting this ready? Because, it's been about a year in November, so I don't want to rush that, is what I'm saying.
I don't want to rush it either, but we have created the behavior as a board and a superintendent where we've gotten really good at receiving the feedback of 5 individuals, taking it back to staff and modifying it or creating an item, with the exception of inclusive playgrounds, that is builds in the input of all 5 board members. So in my mind, it is taking this information, which is really convenient because we're having a public conversation where you all can engage with each other, that allows us to take that information. We'll draft something, meet with you individually, get each of your individual perspectives, and then push it back out and have another public conversation.
Okay.
So I would say this is a relatively quick timeline that we have, because we do this every month. This is just the next topic that we're talking about. And I think a lot of I'm in a really advanced state because based on the sample, the Brevard model, every single one of you, you all like it. Every single one of you have said it is a great starting point for us. I think it's taking that model along with the contract and then merging the two and then getting your feedback on that. And then I think we'll be in a good place to say, all right, let's go have our conversations.
Right, I saw Ms. Berenborg first, and
Okay,
then I'll go
I'm sorry.
back down.
Sure. The Brevard and the Lee County ones, Brevard mentions general counsel, so they have an in-house counsel?
Yes, and that's the biggest, they both do.
Right. So that's why they have these evaluation forms, because they have an in-house counsel, not a firm that they are working with. So I'm just concerned about, we only had 2 firms that came forward in our last time that we went out for bid, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I think we should be very careful in the way we do this. And we need to not do an evaluation form that is an in-house counsel evaluation form. Yes, there are some things in there I thought were good, but again, we don't have an in-house attorney. We have a firm that we work with. And I'm going to go back to the point of we don't just work with Molly. We also work with that firm for our DSEG order, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and some other day-to-day operations. And that's not Mrs. Shattuck, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the part that I think, if we're evaluating all their services, we need to consider those parts too.
And I think what we would create would allow you to not evaluate, when I say evaluation, I don't think hire, fire. I think feedback and growth
Right,
is
that's
what
exactly
I
how I
see.
want it to be,
And
feedback.
I have the advantage of knowing each of you, and that is all of your individual intention. It's not to fire, it is to provide feedback, it is to grow. You have been charged with a huge responsibility, and this is to ensure the quality of this contract, which you're on the hook for. We're receiving those particular services. So I think it is creating, to me, it is a more of a protocol to facilitate or deepen your understanding of the services that are being provided in order to exercise that specific option in the contract. Whereas typically in other contracts, staff, we would say, all right, we're not getting what we need. We've done A, B, C, D, and E, which is clearly defined. We're going to execute that contract. This is a little bit unique. So it is not an evaluation per se, that we're evaluating an individual, we're evaluating the firm. We're deepening the understanding of each of the 5 board members in terms of the services that are being provided in order to provide feedback.
Okay, so are there, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Are there any other districts that do have an evaluation process for evaluating a firm that they work with?
I don't know. I can look and have that understanding and bring it back to the board.
That would be nice to find out, yeah. Because I'm looking at in-house evaluations, and it would be nice to see if there's one for a firm evaluation as well.
And my guess would be no, that there's not unless it's built into a specific contract. But that doesn't mean it's not a good practice for a board to
No, I'm not
create a
saying not
process.
do
Yeah,
it.
so,
Oh, obviously, I said we should, but
Yeah.
I just think we should look at maybe if they're out there or something that
Yes. Yeah.
evaluates a firm,
If-
not just an
if-
individual.
If we create a process that allows the board to make the most informed decision and provide the most informed feedback, then we've done good work. And we strengthen the relationship that we have with our law firm, who's providing the support. And I think that's work worth doing for both whoever we're contracted with as well as us. And it will strengthen our relationship, for sure.
Okay.
Dr. Schiff.
Two
Mrs.
things. Three
Mrs.
things, really. I
Berenborg.
completely agree with Mrs. Berenborg about the distinction between internal and external. makes an enormous difference in our roles and responsibilities around this. So I completely agree. I think that's paramount. Number two, however we move forward with this, as we have done with Dr. Moore also had input onto how he wanted to be evaluated and what he thought was significant, or the significant indicators of his performance. And I think we're discussing this here as if the firm or the attorney we work with would not have that input. I think it's important, okay, to clarify, because I haven't heard that. It's possible I missed it.
Good point, no.
But I haven't heard that raised here, and this is an iterative process, and it's a dynamic process. It's not something that we just decide and impose, but should be done in collaboration and consultation with the person and firm that we're evaluating. There are many things that we potentially don't know about what happens behind the scenes, and this was true when we had Suzanne DeGresta as well. There were many ways in which she relied on her firm that we didn't see because it was just built into the contract. And I think we need to consider that as we move forward. Third, when I'm looking at some of these forms, in particular, I'm looking at the one for Lee County. And again, I don't know if that's internal or external, but I'm going to assume that for the purposes of this conversation, most of them are internal. That form clearly has been designed to be completed online, which is great. It would be, it would be really nice if we could go into an online mechanism, and in each of these it says board performance, stakeholder performance, et cetera. There's an item and there's a rating, and you fill it out, and then somewhere in here, I'm sure, well, these are just by numbers. I would also expect that there would be a place to fill in comments. But the more of this that we could design to be online, the quicker it would get done, and the more consistent would be the evaluation. So I'd highly recommend that however we move forward. I'm sorry to Dr. McMahon for what I'm about to add. Well, because if he's I don't know who's going to put together the form online. I'm just sort of assuming it's him because he's.
No.
Okay, just because he does all things, you know.
Very fragile right now. He's got a lot of work in front of him. You're okay, Dr. McMahon. Go back to work.
Okay, good. Sorry. You know, whoever does our best online work to create forms that can then be analyzed. I'm sorry. He's always the one who comes up for me because he's so good at it. But if he's not the one on this, just somebody who designs a form that looks like this.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to go to Mr. Barefoot.
Yeah.
He hasn't gotten a chance, and then Dr. Jones.
My turn?
Your turn.
All right, just a couple of thoughts, suggestion. Maybe Dr. Moore could, having listened to this conversation, draft a letter of understanding and with the law firm, and it would be general in nature, reflecting now after a year of the various areas that we have chosen to use their expertise, everything from school board meetings to the DSEG order and perhaps HR issues, et cetera. And then within the framework of a letter of understanding, that's not revising the contract, that's just a letter of understanding to be shared with or agreed to by the law firm, the managing partner or whomever. And then within the framework of the individuals, rather than put a name on it, how about much like we have, I call them critical few objectives. You have 4 or 5 things, no more, that are really important for anybody to be evaluated on. So if it's the school board attorney, it could be Joe Smith, it could be Mary Moore. Doesn't matter whose name it is. What are the specific things that we, combination of the school board and Dr. Moore, expect to get from in the way of advice, counsel, what have you, from the school board attorney? And that way, using the suggestion that Dr. Schiff just made, come up with a number system, much like we evaluate Dr. Moore, against this agreed upon set of 4 or 5, whatever the number is, of expectations. That way, the school board attorney, whoever he or she is, knows exactly what we value and knows exactly what he or she will be evaluated on. And along the way, it doesn't do any good to wait till the end of the year to evaluate somebody. That should be an ongoing process. And I think if you use this, and I don't want to sound like a corporate person here, but it's the type of process that is used in every business that I've been involved in. You use outside law firms for certain things, you use outside marketing firms, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can get an agreement with the firm and then be specific as to the functions within the firm that you're relying upon, with 3 or 4 or 5 really important things at that function, you expect them to be able to deliver with you. I think you will come, 1, you will make it more objective. 2, it won't become personalized, and it'll be very professionally done. So those would be my suggestions.
All right, thank you. And then Dr. Jones was next.
This goes back to Matt. You said that you work with about 6 or 7 districts in this type of capacity without an evaluative tool. Is it just basically that you get information from the superintendent on how you're doing, or how does that work?
I remember the last time I was here, I got in trouble for not using the microphone. I'm probably, Dr. Jones, not the best person to speak to on that. I'm not even sure about the number of districts. I know we have a fair number. I know Molly
She has
has
3, I
got
think,
2 or
yeah.
3 that
Yeah.
she's involved in. And the real reason I know, I'll just tell you, is because once a year, y'all need to have a reorganization meeting on the exact same day, and that's when all of the attorneys have to figure out, well, who's going where,
Right.
because we have more school boards than we have education lawyers. So I don't know how they're evaluated. I'll say this just generally, having worked in-house for a couple of state agencies, state-level agencies, one of which being the Department of Education, one of which being the Florida House of Representatives, I got feedback
Okay.
when there was things that I needed to do differently or better. It's a unique relationship. I understand it's a contract, and so it's easy to just say, well, they're a contractor, but we're not providing cement, we're not providing roofs, we're not providing computers, we're not providing textbooks. There needs to be, I think, that kind of feedback. I would expect to hear from Dr. Moore if he thought I was dropping the ball. I'd expect to hear from you, frankly, if you thought I was dropping the ball on the desegregation case. So all that to say, I wish I had a better answer for you,
Okay.
but I don't. I believe that those districts where we are kind of the day-to-day, the school board attorney, so to speak, or one of our attorneys is the school board attorney, that's more of the process for evaluation. It's that kind of regular, frequent feedback
And I
loop.
think that's important, just feedback, whether it's with an evaluation tool or not. The feedback is what the dialogue and how we do better. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Mr. Rosario?
Yeah, I want to go back, I want to turn back to the timeline discussion, because I think there were 2 different timelines. There's the timeline of when to get this completed by, and then there's the timeline that we're considering what would be included within the evaluation tool. So in the evaluation tool, when do we expect, for example, for a self-evaluation, if we're requiring for the firm or for Molly to provide a self-evaluation, when would that happen? When would the board individually have the sit-down, private, conversations with Molly? When would we have that with the superintendent? When would we have the final formal evaluation, written, our feedback? That timeline is different from what I just heard. So we might not be there yet, but there is an outline of the evaluation tool timeline in the backup. And of course, dates are not included in there. It's just, kind of like a shell that we can probably plug in dates at some point moving forward. But the timeline in terms of creating this tool, having the conversation, putting all of this together, something that I thought of as we were having this conversation, which probably won't have any major impact on the process, hopefully, is that we don't have, do we have a discussion session in November? We don't have that's what I thought. So we don't have a discussion session in November. We have just the board meeting in November, and that's the same evening as the reorg. So that means the next discussion session would be in December, unless we tag some of this onto our November meeting at which point there may be new board members. There will be, well, we don't know what would happen.
So, through the chair, my recommendation would be, there's a lot of moving parts in
Right.
November with new board members, new seatings, and blah, blah, blah. We only have one meeting in December. It's on the earlier side of the month because the last 2 weeks were obviously not in school. So at that workshop, my intent would be to have, here is a timeline of how this process would be implemented. So the initial timeline is, that gives me enough time, create document, get your individual feedback, make modifications and changes. I will do this in full concert and partnership with Molly, so we can do this together. So it comes back to you early December, and the board now knows, all right, we're ready to go. This is the timeline. It should be a complete package by December. And that meeting would be earlier in the month of December.
So that's December 12th, workshop during the day and then board meeting at night.
Can't say specifically because the board ultimately approves when we have these meetings, but that will be coming, that's part of the November discussion. But I would proffer to say that would be the appropriate date.
It's already on the calendar.
We'll see.
December 12th.
Proffering is right.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, not intending to slow the process down any, because I do understand its importance. But in that meeting, you will have at least one and possibly two board members who have zero experience working with a school board attorney, have no idea what they do, what their role is, will have had very minimal direct interaction with them. We have no idea at this moment how that's going to turn out. So imagine the possibility that there will be at least one, maybe two, who are not really able to contribute with any real experience or will not be able to make significant contribution to that conversation on the basis of knowledge. That's going to be a tricky conversation to have. I'm raising that not because I'm trying to delay the process, certainly nor add any more meetings prior to that. But simply to consider that if you want to have a conversation of this gravity that's going to have significant impact on how we move forward with legal counsel, which is one of our most important roles here, you may not want to do it on the first or second meeting of new board members. Just my opinion. But this will be for others to decide, not me.
I'm okay with a special meeting if board members want it, but I had a follow-up.
Yep. Ms. Berenborg and
Thank
then
you.
Ms. Rosario.
I don't think we should rush this. I think it should be a thoughtful process, and I agree, we're going to have at least one board member that's new, so that board member has the right to have an opinion on this as well. I don't think it's right for this board to put that on this next board as a newest thing to deal with. So I think that we should look at maybe having you in December meeting, give us some sort of timeline, and then in January, we start the process of really looking at the evaluation tool.
I agree with that. When you look at, when we brought in new evaluation tools for teachers, it was at least a year process to look at it, for both parties to agree, to understand, so probably even more than a year when I look back. So with one meeting in November, one meeting in December, I would vote for after the holidays.
So through the chair, I'm comfortable bringing back a timeline, the work that's been done up and through December. Once again, my intent is to create a process so future boards and future superintendents don't have to say, well, we don't have a process on how we communicate or evaluate the impact of services. We're creating a protocol that can be followed, adopted by the board moving forward. So to me, it's not a let's hurry up and rush to create a tool to evaluate. Yes, let's take the time. I'll be honest. I think the appropriate amount of time over the course of what is now 2 months is more than doable. But to ask someone who literally just put himself or herself in a seat to do an evaluation of a firm no, that's not right. But there are 3-4 board members who have meaningful feedback that should be provided in any exiting board members. Well, I know well, say, here's my feedback for the firm, because it's valuable and desired. So I think it is creating the process, so there is a process in place, but at the same time, it's not pausing to work because we don't have to. And there may be additional feedback that comes in, but I think we have a plan moving forward.
Rosario?
So if you were to bring to us a template, for example, of what the evaluation tool might look like, doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to adopt it right then and there. It could be for feedback, it could be for more conversation, it could be a presentation where you say, this is what it might look like, this is what I received from Molly, from the firm. But certainly, I don't think that it was the intention that we were going to provide immediate evaluation right then and there. Clearly, I think it would be unfair of anyone to create a process for an immediate evaluation. Usually you have a year, a new tool rather, and then you have a year to kind of implement that tool. That said, though, what I didn't consider is the last 4 years of Dr. Schiff being on the board. Board members, would you be in favor of a very informal feedback form to provide in the interim?
Oh, is this
Or
open
not.
discussion? Okay.
Yes.
He would be in favor, okay.
No, I just don't.
Anybody else? Are you talking about like immediately? That's
No,
what I-
within the next month or two.
That's immediately, I think. I think informal feedback from Dr. Schiff to Dr. Moore, I think, is really important.
Got it. All right.
Because you can
I'm
pretty much
okay
say
either
what
way,
you want.
We still
Well-
need to give feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I have no objection to doing that. I will say that one of the things that's been significant about the last 4 years on this board, for 3 of us, is it's been tumultuous, right? Within our first, 2 or 3 months, we were looking for an interim superintendent. Within our first year, we were looking for a permanent superintendent. In our third year, we lost general counsel. In our second year,
CFO.
we had a pandemic. Right, it's kind of been one thing after another. I say that only because things have arisen during those 4 years that many board members go through an entire term or two without experiencing. So it gives particular insight into the role of a board member, how to evaluate certain services. A new board member simply just won't have that for a long time. What's my point? So I guess my point is I certainly don't mind doing that, but I really want people to be aware that even in this process, if you take 2, 3, or 4 months, that is nothing compared to the 4 years we've had that qualify us for a level of evaluation that a new board member frankly won't have for at best a year, if not 2. So I would just urge you who are continuing in this role to consider that, because it's only fair to the firm, to the attorneys, to Dr. Moore, frankly, and to this board, because all of that is public record, both in meetings and in documents. And it's only fair to a new board member who, we all kind of got a trial by fire. With any luck, new people will not, but they might. But the trial by fire has had us emerge into this role stronger and more quickly, I think, than many board members do in 4 or 8 years.
Ms. Rosario?
Gosh, I just lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me, apologize.
Dr. Jones?
If we have consensus on doing this an evaluation tool, I would just caution us not to move quickly. If we're going to do it right.
Right.
And all those things we've talked about the firm being part of this, knowing what we expect of them, self-evaluation, how we work with this, just do it right.
Heard.
Got it.
So just to summarize as far as next steps, I think that's where we're at this point. Number 1 that I have is to have a discussion with the firm and also to obtain input from the firm as part of the development of this feedback protocol or evaluation tool, whatever we end up calling it, to draft that tool and to bring that tool back in December for feedback. Prior to that, we will be obtaining individual board member feedback on the tool that is drafted, so that that feedback will be incorporated into the drafted tool that's presented in December. And then also just to find out if other districts who contract with firms, if there are examples of evaluations that they use just to incorporate as part of the development process, to see if there's any qualitative difference between that and evaluation tools that are used for internal counsel. Anything that I missed, Ms. Rosario?
Yeah, I do have a contract question or concern when you contact the firm that might need to be changed. On page 5, it lists Sarah Milliman as the contact for public records, as the public records custodian. So that would probably need to change for sure.
Yeah, go back over what is expected in December.
Yeah,
In December, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm incorrect with this, is to bring back, we'll be bringing back a drafted tool, evaluation tool, that incorporates input from the firm, from individual board members, and then if we see any other information, but we'll be using the Brevard template as a jumping off point and a timeline. Thank you, Ms. Rosario.
Okay, I heard timeline only for December earlier.
yeah, I
I
didn't,
didn't realize we were going to put all that work on you to do
No,
that
So
by
through the chair,
December.
what I'll bring is a timeline. Within that timeline, a status update. This is kind of where we are. This is what has been accomplished. To me, the work that needs to be done, will in fact be done. So it's a matter of tasking this out. So rather not saying I need to have all of these things accomplished, let me provide an update as to where we are. So an update, what has been accomplished and what is yet still to be accomplished, which would be identified within that timeline.
just,
Do it right.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to rush the product.
I don't,
Yeah, please don't, I know you're going to give us a timeline, but you don't have to rush that.
heard. Thank you, Dr. Jacobs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for driving 5 hours to be with us today. Madam Chair, that exhausts our agenda.
It exhausted.
Hang on, 1 second, if I
Yes.
may. Dr. Moore, we spoke briefly about this in the break, and I know you're going to do a Facebook Live about it, but could you just for a second, for parents, talk about the impact of the hurricane days?
So the impact of the hurricane days was 3 days of lost instruction built into the hours of instruction that we have, which is 180 days or the equivalent. We still have more than enough hours not to make up those specific days. So my intent is to continue to move forward with the school year that we're currently under. We did have a state call with all superintendents last Friday. And it was communicated to us, if you have the appropriate number of hours still in your schedule, you are fine, continue to move forward. If there's a request for a waiver, there is statute that allows for districts to make a request. Obviously, we don't have to make a request, so we're in a good space. So we're going to continue to move on and hope that we don't have any more disruptions in instruction. Since you're saying this, I do want to say, we are working with 3 individual schools in, I think it's Lee County, who will not be returning to their schools. So those 3 schools will be displaced. Those students will be, in some cases, broken up to other elementary schools and other in other cases, very temporary housing. So the supplies, their desks, everything they left at school is no longer there, so we pushed out last Friday and pushing it out all this week, opportunities for our community to bring school supplies, school clothing to our main offices at each of our school. And then next Saturday is our community-wide Day of Caring, which is a incredibly cool event in which our entire community will be working on community-based projects. United Way is leading this work. This isn't us, this is United Way. But they're going to have a kickoff event at the Citrus Bowl, and we're going to have the bus there. Hopefully by that time it'll already be packed. So maybe we'll have 2 buses, but that will be another opportunity to bring school supplies And as soon as we do that, the following week, we'll make sure it gets in the hands of children. So as they return to school, they have not returned to school yet. Hopefully by the week after next, they will actually be in school. But just heartbreaking for students to go through 3 years of a pandemic, the impacts of the pandemic, and now another disruption for those students is just truly heartbreaking. So anything we can do as a community to help them is the right thing for us to do.
Thank you so much for that update. And I ask because I've gotten a few questions from parents who just want to know how the rest of the year is going. To that end, if there are specific items that Lee County students need, or that if you could tell, if there's anything specific, rather than random stuff people might have around, but if there are specific needs, if you could clarify that. I know you're going to do a Facebook Live about it, but if you could clarify those specific needs or how to make donations to fulfill those needs, that would be helpful too.
And right now, the best information we have, and they continue to say it, is the school list you get prior to the opening of schools when you go to the Eckerts.
Yep.
CVS, sorry, I'm old. The CVS, and you have to get all of those supplies. They just don't have them. And schools obviously have them, but they're gone too. So as simple as it means, as well as typical clothing, non-uniform clothing that they could wear to school. Once again, very specific in terms of those two needs. And as we continue to communicate, if the need changes, we'll be able to push that out as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rosario?
Can we do I know it's very short notice before Saturday at this point, but if we're going to extend the donation deadline, can we do an ad in the newspaper?
So just advertising all of y'all's meetings. The deadline for that was probably 2 weeks ago. They only go to print, the deadline
Once
is
a
like
week.
9, 10.
It's once a week.
They only go to print once a week, so they have to have their stories in a week. So
Yeah, by this Friday for the following week.
it would be too late for this series, but yes, if we're doing things beyond next week, then we can push out information. We're doing our full blitz, which is ConnectEd, school site messengers, our social media. We have an established network. We can push notifications to every parent's device. Newspaper can't do that. So we think with our structures that we have in place, we'll be able to effectively communicate.
Well, I think it would be nice for the district not only to reach out to parents, but to reach out to the community at large and let the community know that we are everyone collecting for this purpose. Who's going to actually deliver? Who is going to deliver? What's the plan for delivery?
So we haven't had that meeting yet. Right now, the focus has been on the process in which we're collecting. So this week, we'll figure out how we're going to get there.
I don't mind volunteering if, there comes a time, if you need.
Do you have the appropriate, I know Ms. Barenborg has the appropriate driver's license to drive a bus. I don't know if you do.
Not anymore. My CDL is expired.
I have a driver's license.
If you have to have the CDL.
No, a CDL.
Right.
Well, I can go. I mean,
Yeah.
I could follow the bus.
But point
But I don't
taken.
mind,
and
I don't mind volunteering on
we'll create
behalf
that
of the
plan.
school district. If you need bodies, I don't mind being there.
You have level 2 clearance. Do you?
I will give you my clearance for sure.
There is a group that is also in town that is sending over trucks full of supplies and clothing and things like that. So we might be able to tag with them. I know the group, so
Okay.
we could tag with them possibly because they have semi-trucks going over with things.
Perfect. And then one of our desire was, and as a Hurricane Andrew survivor, I can tell you, there was just piles of clothes that were, the giving was so intentional. So it wasn't intentional, I'm sorry. It was just things were just delivered to Homestead, Florida and dropped off. And people who gave of their time, gave of their resources, that resource or donation was never received. It was dumped.
Right.
So we have established relationships with the school to ensure that anything that our community gives is in the hands of children. So we've taken the time to say, where do we actually connect with the schools, with the district, to make sure that we're just not delivering it to like the Red Cross at a warehouse and it sits there.
Right.
We're going right to where these kids are going to be.
Good.
And I do know that they're still asking people, unless you're with a certain organization or help, please don't come to that area. So yeah, we have to just be careful that we're doing it the right way. Okay, with that, I
Hold
think
on
we are.
one sec, sorry.
Oh,
I just want to, I'm sorry. But also to that end, not only have they lost school supplies and clothing, but as a parent, no longer the parent of a small child, but to the degree they've lost things to
Toys.
entertain their kids with,
Yeah.
toys, books, things for the home. I have about 40,000 Legos at home that I would love to get rid of. I think I, single-handedly supported the Lego industry for 15 years. But other things like that, if we can be aware, what we don't want, as you said, is things that aren't useful and going to be used. But what we do know is that parents are also now faced with how to entertain kids while they may or may not be working. And so whatever of those kinds of non-school related but equally supported things can be helpful would be great to know also.
Okay, with that, I believe we're done. It's 3 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.